In the last part of this story, we stopped at the moment when the prince said that after what he had seen, all those people who came to him would not question each other because of two different views. Then he pointed out that even if they agree on one opinion, there is a completely different problem. Because of the impossibility to be sure of judgments based on mere assumptions, as soon as another point of view appears, doubts settle in their minds. According to him, all those people will be confused. What decision should be made, and what is the right decision? He wants all those people to at least once break their heads over such a dilemma. At that moment, his servant marveled at how brilliant his master was, because with a tiny action he was able to carry out such an elaborate plan. Danny respects him for that. At that moment, the protagonist is standing in front of the very store she gave to her friend. Then the girl asked her if she liked the way everything looked. The protagonist immediately asked where they were and thought about how everything looked so nice from the outside that she couldn't understand it at all. Once inside, she immediately asked herself if she came here to buy props, but her friend just asked why this store is called Cheese. Then the girl said that the name of the store she chose because the cheese is very stretchy. From that, the beginning and end of it does not tear. According to her, it is the same with information, because it is scattered in pieces, but in the end remains as a whole like cheese. Naturally, the protagonist is a little surprised by this explanation and thought that this is more like a dream interpretation. But she is happy for her friend and says that he is doing well because the store is open. But she does not understand what the girls need to do next. Then her friend thought about the question a bit and asked the lady of the rose garden if she should try to go inside first and wait for customers. At this point, the girl thinks that everything is hopeless and then tells her friend that she is wrong and they need advertising. Of course, the lady's friend is surprised by this and asks if it is necessary. At this point, the protagonist realizes that the girl has a typical way of thinking of a noble lady. After these thoughts, Lady Rosaria asked her friend if she really thinks that because they will sit and do nothing will appear customers. After these wise words from her friend, the girl who owns the store was happy, but suddenly began to hear voices that tried to understand what kind of store. They immediately opened the door to look, which naturally surprised the protagonist. But immediately she asked these guys who were looking at her in bewilderment if they had some free time. At that moment, one of the guys looked at the protagonist and asked what she needed, and he wondered if the girl was an aristocrat. But the protagonist immediately went up to them and said that she called them because there was one thing they could help her with. At this point, one of the boys immediately says that he will not steal, but the protagonist is not embarrassed at all. She thinks that the boy is very brave, even knowing the fact that she is of noble blood. She can express her opinion. She thinks that it can be useful. Then she decided to calm them down and asked them not to worry because she does not entrust such things. She said she just needs a person who knows the neighborhood well. Saying these words, she gives the guy 2 gold coins, from which naturally his friends are very surprised and asked if it is really real gold. Then the protagonist, pointing to the store, says that as they could notice the store just opened and there are no customers. Then she says that firstly, her friend's information gathering organization buys all the rumors known to people, and secondly, she can tell him everything he is interested in. Also, she notes that if they tell all the people about it, she will give them 1 gold coin every day. She is well aware that the biggest key to success in the industry of buying and selling information is its quantity. According to her, whatever the rumor is not important, because the information should be as much as possible. And in this regard, the priority is to publicize the existence of such an organization. She understands perfectly well that if those children widely shine it, such publicity will bring gossip from different corners, and her friend Lady Cheddarji should buy and sell based on the accuracy and rarity of the accumulated information. At that moment, she puts a mask on her friend's face and asks her to brace herself, because she will support her wherever she can. Of course, her friend does not understand why she needs the mask, but then the girl tells her to be sure to use it when dealing with customers for her own safety, because according to her, those who sell rumors tell secret stories, and therefore it is not good that her face will be recognized. Naturally, her friend agrees with the words of the protagonist and says that she will definitely use it, but she does not understand why she needs this mask, because the clients have not come yet. At this moment, some girl comes in. Then the protagonist tells her friend that this is a memorable first guest, and she needs to go out to him as soon as possible. Naturally, the cheddar agrees with this, and immediately goes out to the guest. At this moment, the protagonist realizes that perhaps they are not so experienced, but the organization gets to work. Then the action of the story moves to the house of the Marquis, who is drinking champagne. At this moment, his servant comes to him and asks if the Marquis called him. Then the Marquis asks his servant to sit down, and without any ceremony. Then suddenly the Marquis says that, of course, the servant was very surprised and asked if he understood correctly that the Marquis means His Highness Lloyd. Then the Marquis asked if his servant was not capable of doing so, and remarked that he was instructing him to deal with a weak young boy who had locked himself in his room. He did not understand. Is it really so difficult to do so? At this point, the servant thought a little and wondered if this weak young boy was not receiving the emperor's attention, and he wondered if he was the first prince he knew. At this time, the Marquis interrupts his thoughts and asks what his servant's answer will be, at which point the servant, after some thought, says that he understood his Marquis's order and thought that he would first of all remain on the Marquis's side, because even if the first prince has changed, the heir to the throne is still the same. At which point the Marquis realizes that this will considerably pay off his family's debt. After a while, the action moves to Lloyd's room. There, the young man is doing push-ups. After he finished, he immediately stood on his feet, and we can notice his very fit body at this point. Even his servant is surprised that since the guy began to exercise, a very short time has passed and he is already quite fit. In some ways, the servant is even jealous of his master. Immediately afterwards, he asked Dane if the thing he had recently asked for was ready. Hearing this question, the lad immediately said that he had just received it and was going to show it to the prince. Immediately afterwards, he opened the box which was in his hands, and it turned out to contain a very beautiful earring. Looking at it, Lloyd said that it was a very useless luxury. Then the servant remarked that this was, of course, so this earring would be used by him, and therefore it could not have been made in any way. At this point, the first prince thinks that in Korean this would be called nonsense, but his servant says that especially this earring matches the colour of Lloyd's eyes. Right after that, the first prince takes the earring and puts it in his ear, and says that everything is fine and it's functioning. Right after that, he tells his servant that he's going out for a while and will be back. Of course, Dane is surprised by this, and wonders where His Majesty is going just as suddenly. But the prince does not answer anything, and just opens the door in front of him. At this moment, the sad servant thinks that despite the loneliness and sadness, he will not cry, but still asks the prince to at least tell him where he is going. It turns out that just as noble ladies periodically organize social tea parties, so young gentlemen held meetings among themselves. One of these meetings is a noble stag, which is held in the library Ella Certa. The guys are having a nice conversation, and suddenly one of them says that today's discussion is over. It turns out that he is the Count Cedric's Russell Cedric, and the main figure of the meeting. Immediately after that, all the guys left the library and said goodbye to each other. Suddenly, some guy comes up to the main figure of the meeting and asks if he understood correctly that he is the eldest son of the Count Cedric, whose name is Russell. Then the guy says that everything is right and asks who is the person who is interested. Suddenly, the first prince takes off his hood in front of him, and then on the face of the eldest son of the Count, it is impossible to hide the surprise. Immediately after that, the first principal asks if he thinks that they should talk. At this time, the son of the Count is very much surprised to see the first prince in front of him. Immediately, the action shifts to the next day. Then the protagonist reads some letter. After reading which, she is surprised that there was a conversation about Russell. In her opinion, he's a regular weirdo. At this time, Lloyd began to cough to attract the attention of the girl. Naturally, she noticed this and asked what was going on with him. But then the guy said that it was nothing unusual and asked if she had anything else. Then she mentioned that according to her parents, despite his oddness, he was a very capable person. Right after these words, the guy thanked the girl for the useful information for him. Hearing these words, she wondered what kind of intrigue he was weaving again, thinking that he was a completely unbearable business partner. But it turned out that to prepare for the upcoming plenary session, in which the first prince will participate right now, they are exchanging information about high-ranking aristocrats, which they received from the Duke and Duchess of Rosaria. She also added that those who represent the Crown Prince's power and influence are the Count Share and the Marquis of Tennessee. It turns out that the Count Share is an old acquaintance of the Empress and the Crown Prince's strongest aide, and the Marquis of Tennessee is the man who handles all matters related to the Crown Prince. It turns out that if the Count Share goes out and represents the Prince's interests, the Marquis deals with the fallout. At this point, the first prince is a little surprised by this information and says that the Crown Prince was not happy with the growing power of the Marquis of Tennessee. He does not understand why this is so. Then the girl said that everything is as obvious as possible, because due to his character, the Crown Prince cannot tolerate the growing power of anyone who could become a threat to him in the future. Then the prince answers her and says that he thinks it is silly, because it must be this constraint will only make the Marquis laugh, with which the Rosary, of course, agrees. She said that she thought she should consider the Marquis as representing the interests of the prince and not the Earl of Share. Of course, this was not very clear to Lloyd, so the lady asked him to think for himself, because they are the embodiment of greed, and with their endless greed, they want to increase their wealth and power by any means possible. She says the aristocrats only follow the Crown Prince's opinion. She says it's because they have faith in the one whose hand they hold, and that they are convinced that there will be no contingencies and that the Crown Prince will become emperor, because that would increase their influence as cronies. And she says that no matter how much the Kaizen restrains the aristocrats, because of their symbiotic relationship, they sit still. Immediately after these words, the protagonist notices that the guy has a strange expression on his face. Then he emphasizes that his partner is much smarter than he could expect. At this time, the protagonist thinks that everything is exactly as she expected, and he is not an ordinary person. After hearing these words, she asks if he is serious, and also wonders what he thinks of her at all. Immediately after that, the first prince said that he had misspoken and hoped for forgiveness. At that moment, he was holding some document in his hands. Then the girl noticed that among the supporters of the first prince, there was a dubious person. In fact, not suspicious people. In her opinion, it's even harder to find. This is the moment when the guy asks if he understood correctly what she said about Viscount Ronde. Then the protagonist said that she meant it, and also recalls that he said that he had met this man. Hearing this question, the young man says that his surprise Viscount pretended to be friends with him, according to the first prince. If judging by his actions, it would seem that Viscount is his closest confidant. Then he remembered that the man seemed to be happy that the Lloyd returned. According to the guy, Viscount came to him after learning that he is participating in the plenary session. At this point, the protagonist seems to rejoice and shows with all her appearance that she is a little surprised by this, because Vicomte is still clinging to the first prince, and this is unexpected for her. Hearing these words, the guy was very surprised, but then the protagonist told him that from what she learned a few years ago, people said that his family had some wealth and reputation. However, now about 2 of his businesses have gone bankrupt, so that the Viscount's financial situation is shaken, according to her. It seems that after that the man has squandered the rest of his fortune on gambling. Now it is even said that he is in debt. Hearing these words, the guy asked if this is true, and then the girl was surprised. Then the protagonist says that in such a position, it would make more sense for the Viscount to be near the Crown Prince and benefit at his expense. According to her, there is absolutely no benefit to pretending to be friendly to the weak first prince. Right after that, the guy interrupts her and asks what happens if someone pays him money to be on his side. According to him, it's true because that man could be a spy introduced to the first principal and getting paid to do his errands. He thinks it could be someone embedded a pawn to undermine the position of the first prince from within. Right after that, he says that we need to find out who is paying him to do this. At this point, the protagonist realizes that she has a couple of guesses. But for now, she refrains from naming those people because it could create prejudice. She just says that whatever it takes to find out right now. Hearing these words, the guy asks how she plans to do it. Well, then the protagonist is not lost, and says that if he had difficulties with money, it is sure that he tried to borrow money. And in other places, then the guy says that it makes a certain sense. Does not wonder if she can find out about it. At this time, she thinks about the fact that everything is once again going as she expected, and when it comes to money matters, she is the one. Right after that, the girl says that she can probably find out, but in doing so, she imagines the very lady with whom she quarrelled. Immediately after that, the action moves to Beatrice's trading company. There's some girl inside called Rendor. Suddenly, his servant enters the office of this young lady and says that she has a guest. Then she told his guest to come in. At that moment, she is shown the main character, who says that they have not seen each other for a long time. When she saw her, she was also very happy. Immediately, she apologized for coming to her without informing her in advance. But then Lady Randor said that there is nothing wrong with it, and she is a guest that the girl is always happy to see her. Immediately after that, she tells Lady Rosaria that everything here is not a luxury, but let her sit down. Then the protagonist noticed that this office is the pride of the Rendor family. Naturally, hearing such words, she thanked the protagonist. And at that moment, the girl noticed that her friend looks happy, so much so that she is shining. At that moment, the Rendor says that this is so, and now she feels more interest and pleasure than when she was running the Rendor family trading company. At that moment, she says that according to her friend, things are going great. In response, the lady says that everything is just fine, and that's why Lady Rosaria shouldn't worry. Right after that, she asks the protagonist what happened since she came here. Right away, the protagonist gets to the point and says that she dropped by here because she wanted to ask something. She immediately asks her friend if she knows anything about Viscount Zephyr. When she hears this, her friend says that of course she knows something. At this point, the protagonist thinks that she thinks he has left a deep impression on her since she answered without even thinking. At this point, the protagonist's thoughts are interrupted by her friend, who says that she only knows information about the money part. Then the protagonist is happy about it and says that she would like to know more about it. At that moment, her happy friend gets up from her seat and says that in that case, the protagonist has made the right choice. Coming here, the girl immediately says that first she will show her friend some documents. At that, she says that first of all, she wants to point out that the financial performance of the Viscount is very bad. According to her, the past manager of the trading company, Rendor, and the Viscount made a deal about 3 years ago, according to her. Since then, the amount of fee. She informs him that in addition to being a VIP, he is also an important customer of the blacklisted retailers in the area. Hearing this, the protagonist says that in a way this is really amazing. Immediately after that, the protagonist looked at the list of who the man owed and thought that she could not believe that he had borrowed such a large amount of money for only 3 years. Immediately after these thoughts, the friend of the protagonist says that in fact, with such a large debt, according to the rules of each merchant should no longer lend to him. But because of the fact that he sometimes came and paid a large amount of loans, one time he was allowed to continue to borrow, also according to her. Recently, the man lent some money again. Immediately after that, the protagonist says that even now knowing all the details of the Viscount's situation, she still can't believe it. Hearing these words, her friend said that he also visited her current company to borrow money, and of course she refused him. At this point, the protagonist is amazed that the Viscount can't repay this debt, but tries to borrow again. Besides, and I wonder how he paid the old debts. Did he pay them being a spy, then reading the records of the man's debts? She noticed that there is even information about his debts. When she saw this, she immediately decided to ask her friend another question, and asked how the Viscount usually paid for his loans. Then her friend said that he mostly brought cash, jewellery or gold bars, and sometimes even very expensive decorative items. When she heard this, she was very surprised, and as if she had a bright thought. According to a friend of the protagonist, the man said that these are family heirlooms, and such interior decorations were about 7 pieces. Then she showed one of these decorations, and noted that it is so beautiful that she keeps it separately. Seeing the jewellery, protagonist said that she had already seen it. Naturally, her friend was surprised and asked where she could see it, because she knows that the Viscount has no relatives. Then the protagonist said that she saw this jewellery in the palace of the first prince, and then she paid attention to it. Of course, hearing these words, the friend of the protagonist was silent and thought about it and then shrieked loudly. Immediately after this action is transferred to a few days ago. Then the main character together with the first prince walked through his palace. And the Lady of the Rosary paid attention to what a lovely flower pot she saw. She was well aware that she could not understand whether it corresponded to the past Lloyd. But for the present, this is certainly not a suitable decoration. Immediately afterward, the girl told her friend that apparently the Viscount had taken advantage of the inattention of the guards in the palace of the first prince. Naturally, hearing these words, and her friend was very much surprised. At the same time, the protagonist thought about the fact that although her friend was deceived, the Viscount gave her things of the imperial family, so it could be a problem for her friend. Realizing this, she told her friend not to worry because it is not her fault, and she will make sure that she did not get any harm, while the protagonist realizes that she will at least try to help her in this regard. Hearing those words, the Lady Rosaria grabbed Rendor's hands, and then the protagonist's friend asked how she was going to do it, but the protagonist just asked her friend to trust her. At the same time, she asks her friend if she wants to try to increase the funds of the new trading company. Then the action moves to the library of Lesetra. There, someone asks. Russell still does not want to work for him. Then Russell, taking the book in his hand, says that if that guy asks about it, then he refused him the last time. It turns out that the asking guy turned out to be the first prince, who said that people's thoughts have the property to change. But Russell does not change you, and apologizes to the prince, then informs him that he will not change his decision and worked on him. There is no benefit to him. The prince finally realizes what he is told by Russell, who has already informed another man that on the day of the noble stag's meeting, the first prince visited him. But he made it clear that he would not agree to his proposal, even though today is the third time he has come. Immediately after these words, the first prince tells the lad that he is quite stubborn. Then the Rochelle answers the first prince and says that one must have a firm and unyielding will to live in this cruel world. But then the prince answers him by saying that the lad misunderstands his words, and if so, he believes that the Rochelle is too frivolous. Naturally, hearing these words, Brushel immediately said that he is not frivolous, while the first prince smiled and said that if he would work with him, he could see things much grander. Of course, Rushel immediately asked what things the prince is talking about, because he has neither lust for material goods nor shortcomings in money. Then the guy starts listing things that he probably won't get. First of all, he emphasized on knowledge and said that he can assure the first prince that he is the best at it. Besides, Rochelle has never heard the first prince read anything. Then he talks about honor, and not knowing how to say it, he says that he thinks that if he follows the first prince, he will lose it. Then Rochelle says that from what the prince can give him, the only thing left is power, which the prince also doesn't have. Right after that, Rochelle asks what he needs. Naturally, after all these words, Rochelle expected that most likely after such a prince will feel offended and leave. But the Lloyd was not going to retreat, and asked Russell whether he is really sure in his words, namely that he cannot get anything from him. Immediately after these words, Lloyd begins to approach Russell and noticed that he knows people like him well, because in addition to excellent abilities, he has perfect self-control, and he lives so easily because there is nothing that he himself could not achieve. Immediately after these words, when the protagonist has already reached Russell, he is sure to notice that Russell is fed up with all this, and it is from this that the first principal asks the guy why they should not have more entertainment. Hearing this, Russell dismisses everything and says that he has no idea what the prince is talking about. But then the first principal asked the guy to make him emperor. He even pressed the interest of the guy and asked if he was not interested if he could use his skills to enthrone a man to the throne of the empire. But the guy was not confused and said that it could be interpreted as if the Lloyd wanted him to rule over him. During their conversation, a bell suddenly sounded, so Lloyd heard it and said that he would go on. And as he was leaving, he said that he hoped to hear a different answer from the boy tomorrow. After the Lloyd left the library going along the road, he missed the carriage. Then the carriage passing by stopped, and there the door opened, and rather you came out the same man who stole from the palace of the first prince that flower pot. He looked at the guy, and laughing asked who it was. Suddenly from behind someone approached the first principal with a bat in his hands, and as soon as the prince tried to ask the man what he was doing here, the man who was behind his back knocked out the first prince with a single blow. After a while the Viscount's carriage reaches his estate. When they got out of it, the guy who hit the protagonist was carrying him on his shoulders, while the Viscount was walking ahead of them. After a short time, they had already thrown the body of the unconscious Lloyd right on the floor. At this moment, the Viscount towered over him, and looking straight at the lad, reflected that the Marquis of Tennessee had ordered his death. But he could not just get rid of his highness, for he had a chance now. At this time, Viscount began to search the guy's body, and thought that if everything goes well, he can get rich. After a short search, he was able to find something similar to a pendant, and realised that this is a good moment that could change his life. After he took that pendant in his hand, the man thought that now that the place of succession was uncertain, if he took advantage of this and elevated the first prince to the throne, he would become the closest crony of the new emperor. It was then that he thought he would become the single greatest aristocrat in the entire empire. After a short time, the Viscount reached his house and went in to be greeted by his maid. While he thinks that it may seem that he has kidnapped the first prince, but if he explains it well, he will understand. While he thinks that the more important thing is that he must somehow make it so that in the eyes of the Marquis of Tennessee, the prince is dead, then immediately after these thoughts, he looked at his maid and asked you to give him your hand. Naturally, the girl could not have expected this, and gave her hand to the man in surprise, at which time he went into his inner pocket, and suddenly pulled out a knife from there. With this knife, the Vicomte pierced the hand of his maid, who immediately cried out in pain. Immediately after that, the man began to press that pendant to her hand to stain it with blood, while the girl still cried out in pain. Immediately after he did this, the man looked at his maid and asked if this would be enough for everyone to believe that the first prince had been killed. At this time, the girl was still squirming in pain. Seeing this, the man asked his maid not to fake it, and to fill the room with first-class furniture, and to tell his wife and daughter to stay away from the basement. At this moment, the maid looking at him is very angry, and mentally calls the man ugly words, because he behaves so arrogantly, although he has been delaying his wages for several months now. After that, she started to work, and decided that as soon as she gets at least a month's pay, she will leave this estate immediately, while touching this hand to something it hurts very much. The girl with tears in her eyes realizes that it hurts very much, and tries to understand on something he wanted to smear a gold medal with someone else's blood. Immediately after that, she stopped thinking about it, and tried to figure out how the gold medal came to be, since she's been working at the house for 3 years, and has never seen such an expensive item. She also realizes that the basement in the backyard is now under surveillance, but usually no one goes there. The girl wonders if there is something really valuable hidden there. In the evening, she decided to see what is there, and came to the guards and greeted them, and with a filled basket in her hands told them that the master ordered to give them this. Naturally, the guards were very happy about it, and began to look at the alcohol and food that the girl brought. While opening the door to the basement, she told them that she was going somewhere on the orders of the master. While the protagonist is leaving, she hears that the guys are very happy about what she brought. They did not expect this from the stingy Viscount, who told them that they will pay only after the job is done. While heading deep into the basement, the protagonist noticed that the man introduced even the mercenaries to this place, so she realizes that as she thought, there is something valuable here. Immediately after these thoughts, the girl with special enthusiasm descends the stairs, and looking around trying to understand what the man hid here. At this point, he hopes for money or other valuables, but instead the maid suddenly notices on the floor in front of him the first prince who lies with a bloody head. Then she began to look at him, and looking more closely at his head, she wondered if the man really kept this guy's corpse here. Immediately after these thoughts, the protagonist noticed that the guy is still breathing, but she is still frightened by the fact that Vicomte kidnapped a man. In her opinion, she needs to immediately get out of the house of this crazy man. But suddenly, her eyes fell on the guy's buttons. Then she looked at them and saw that they are very unusual and as if cast from silver. Looking at them, she realized that they seem to be very expensive, and if she steals even a piece, no one will know about it. Immediately after these thoughts, the girl decided to steal Lloyd's button. Immediately after this action is transferred to the rumour shop, where the girl says that she is tired to death, while her subordinate says that it is already the 9th hour, and if the Azaria leader finds out that she worked late, there will be trouble. After these words, Lady Chadargi as if to imagine the face of the protagonist who mentioned that she had previously said that the working day ends at exactly 7. Just imagine the protagonist, Lady Chadargi, asked her subordinate not to tell the protagonist about it, because she just imagines her face and is already scared. And then the subordinate girl says that it is because of this they should finish and go home. Naturally, the lady agreed with her subordinate's words and told her to prepare everything for them to leave, at which time some girl in a cloak and hood walks through the streets and heads straight for their shop. Suddenly, the door to the rumour shop opens, and the same girl asks if there is anyone here, at which point the girls are a little surprised that a customer came in at such a late hour, but still decided to accept him. Then the girl who came to the lady said that she came here after hearing some rumours, at which point the girl began to examine her guest in order to draw some conclusions about her. She noticed that her guest had a wound on her arm and a shaking body, while she also noticed a frightened face, so the lady thought that maybe this girl had encountered something bad, while the guest, I went straight to the point and asked, can she get at least some money if she tells the girls what she saw? When Lady Chadargi heard this question, she said that of course the girl could get the money, and asked if she had come here to sell the rumours. Then the maid looked at the button in her hand and thought that she had originally intended to sell the button in the pawn shop and run away, but then changed her mind. It turns out that whatever place she went to, the Vicomte was a regular there, so she had no choice but to leave. And while she was wandering the street, it was smart to go to an organisation that buys gossip, and that's how she ended up in that place. Then suddenly these thoughts were dispelled by the lady and asked if in that case the girl who had come to her would tell what she had seen. Then the maid began to say that in fact it was not even out loud, but information that only a few people knew. Hearing this, the lady said that her identity would be kept confidential, and they gave a full guarantee, so the maid could not worry. Hearing these words, the maid asked if in that case the girl could pay her 5 gold pieces first. Naturally, hearing this, the lady was a little surprised and did not understand why this girl so suddenly asked for such a large sum of money. At the same time, it occurs to her that the apparent information she brought is quite unusual, but she also realizes that she cannot indulge the client, while the maid herself looking directly at the girl wondering why she was silent, and guesses that maybe the problem is that she named an outrageous amount of money. Then Lady Chadargi said that she determines the price of information after hearing it, and if she realizes that it is of importance, she will give the girl something that she will not be disappointed with, while asking that the girl trust her. Hearing this, the maid decided to trust the girl and put a button on the table. Of course, the owner of this place was a little surprised at this and asked herself, what information can this button carry? But the maid does not let these thoughts develop and said that it is a button from the clothes belonging to a man who was kidnapped and kept in the basement, Viscount. Also, the maid added that judging from the clothes of that guy, she thinks it's an aristocrat and now he is unconscious in the basement. Then the lady looked at that button and started to connect all the information in her head. But suddenly, she realized something. Taking the button in her hand, she asked the maid if she had any idea what the button was. But the maid, who obviously knows nothing, asks if it is unusual, or if it is a button that is also very expensive. But Lady doesn't even answer her on these words and just turns around and takes the button and leaves, which naturally surprises the maid a little bit. After a short time, Lady Chadargi reaches into a huge chest, from which she takes a pouch which she throws on the table in front of the maid, who is obviously a little surprised by this. The lady thanked the maid for the important news and told her that in this pouch was the sum of money she had valued the information she had given her, which she said would give the girl no trouble in starting over again. Naturally, the maid is a bit surprised by this, but the lady immediately says that she needs to start a new life and go as far away as possible, and even if possible to leave the empire, and she says that the maid should do it right away. Immediately after the maid left, and the lady started looking at the button, she realized that it was a button with the engraved seal of the first prince. While looking directly at the button, she asked herself what the hell was going on. Realizing that there was no way she could work with this information, she immediately told her assistant that they were immediately going to the Duchy of Rosaria. Immediately after that, the action moves to a training hall in the Duchy of Rosaria. There, the guys watched the lady compete with the head of this training hall, and at the same time they are talking among themselves that it is to be expected that the girl is the only one who can compete with the head, with the other guy agreeing with these words and hoping that she will focus on martial arts. Immediately after this conversation, the guys start supporting the girl and ask her to beat the chapter and spar with them, or better yet, to become their chapter, while the protagonist is thinking about the fact that she doesn't want that at all. At this time, the head of the group, having heard these speeches, says to the girl that since he could notice his squad of knights liked the girl more than he did, then the protagonist says that they just haven't fought her yet, and that's why they say so. Then the guy asks the girl to bet in this case, and offers to make a bet that if he wins, the guy will train with him once a week. Then the girl notices that the guy is very arrogant, and asks what she should do if she has no reason to argue. But the guy just started mocking the girl, and asked if she was afraid to lose and therefore refuses. Naturally, these words made the main character a little angry. Then she says that since he provokes her so much, why not make an argument? But suddenly, at this moment, their conversation is interrupted by one of the maids, whom my lady calls. Then the maid came down to the training room and told the lady that she was interrupting her training because an urgent guest had come. Of course, these words surprised the girl, and she asked who could come at such a late hour, as suddenly she noticed that Bella Chadagi came to her. At this moment, Lady Chadagi apologised to Lady Rosaria for rudeness and said that the matter is urgent. Of course, the protagonist immediately asked what happened, and then her friend asked her to look at the button that was handed to her. Naturally, seeing the button, the main character immediately guessed that it is a button from the first prince's uniform, but she cannot understand why it is a button of her friend. Unexpectedly, Bella immediately whispered in her friend's ear not to be frightened, and reported that she thinks that His Highness the First Prince was kidnapped, of course. This information is very much surprised the main character, who immediately asked who did it. Then Bella said that Vicomte Zephyr supposedly did it. Hearing this, the protagonist thought that if Vicomte did it, he was the spy. Right after that, she turns to Sir Diol and asks the guy if he can take a walk with her right now instead of sparring. Naturally, he was a little surprised at such a suggestion and asked, "Does she really want to take a walk at this late hour?" Then the girl insisted and said that she wanted it right now. She argued that she thought that someone had stolen her thing. At that time, the first prince woke up in the basement. After a short time, the protagonist with her friend were already near the house of the Viscount, where the head of the knights, together with the girl, defeated all the guards who guarded the entrance to the cellar. Seeing that the guy defeats all the enemies, the girl asked if he is not too hard to deal with them, but the belligerent guy just told her that since their lady stole something, it is necessary to teach them a lesson properly. Hearing this answer, the protagonist thought that she said it as an excuse for the guy to go with her. Right after that, the action moves back to some time ago, where they are still at the training base, and the guy asks the girl where she is going to go at night. In response to his question, she said that the Viscount stole her thing, and that's why she thinks she should go and find him. Of course, hearing about the Viscount, the guy got a little angry and called the Viscount a crazy asshole. Already in the present, the guy kicks the guards with his feet and says that they seem to have knocked out all the Viscount's mercenaries. The girl agrees with him and says that apparently no one else will come. At which point the head of the knights turns to the protagonist and asks if she's not planning to just return the stolen goods and leave. Hearing this, Lady Rosaria immediately said that of course it would not be so, while she thought that if you mess with the South Korean, he will repay the debt several times over. She's well aware that they have enough evidence to take the Viscount by surprise, because in the girl's opinion, it is enough that he gambles and steals and embezzles things of the imperial family. She thinks that this is enough to send him to prison, but it seems that it was not enough, and he committed an even greater offence. In the girl's opinion, this offence is the kidnapping of the first prince. According to the girl, in other words, he committed a serious crime by kidnapping and keeping locked up a member of the imperial family. Right after these thoughts, she asks the guy to go to the basement. At the same time, the thoughts do not leave the girl's head, and she realises that thanks to this, it became clear that the Viscount is acting under orders. She realises that the first principle of danger, but the timings coincided well, because with the help of this situation, they will be able to find out who is behind the Viscount. Suddenly, a new thought came into her head, and she began to analyse in more detail what was going on. She remembers how she communicated with the first prince, and how she was very surprised that he was going to go alone to Rushel. At that time, the girl agreed with him, but still said that he should not do that, and asked him to take at least a knife with him. Of course the guy saw it, and was a little surprised and asked why he needed it, and more importantly, asked why she pulled it out from under her skirt. Suddenly, the protagonist swung the knife, and said to the first principal that if things do not go according to plan, let him do this, and waved the dagger. She said he needed to create a gap to escape. At this point, the guy just watched the girl with amazement. Then the first prince didn't want to pick up the knife, and said that she looked cool, even when she was waving the knife. But naturally, Eleanor got a little annoyed, and asked the guy to stop talking nonsense, and just pick up the knife. Remembering all this, she realized that the first prince was purposely hanging around here and there. She realizes that the guy knew perfectly well that he was being followed, and decided to throw himself right into the Viscount's trap. Then the girl mentally calls Lloyd a jerk. But suddenly the door opens right in front of her, and in the darkness the silhouette of a young guy is seen. Naturally, the guard who noticed this immediately drew his sword to protect Helena, wondering what it was, and if any of the scoundrels were still around. After a short time in a fighting stance, the guy asked the man to step back, but in response he heard only a question if they came to save him. Of course the girl was a little surprised by this question, and thought that she was very familiar with this voice. Then the silhouette of a guy did come out of the shadows, and taking off his hood he said that he is the first Prince of Lloyd. Saw the face of the first prince, the main heroine immediately rushed to him, and after she watched him outwardly asked if the young man is not hurt. But the guy, instead of saying how he feels, started, and visually said that the girl seemed worried about him. Right after that, Eleanor suddenly decided to strike the guy, who was obviously very surprised by this, and immediately asked the girl why she was doing it. But either she was so angry that looking at the guy just asked him why he was dodging her blow. Then the smiling first prince asked if he had to be beaten, to which the protagonist rudely responded by grabbing him by the robe and said that it was really so, because he deliberately made it so that he was kidnapped. Then the guy noticed that the girl guessed, however, as he did not think she is quite clever, while he noticed that he thought that it seems to him that first she needs to listen to the explanations of his partner. At that moment, the head of the guards intervenes in their conversation and says that if the girl called this man El the Nightoid, then is the thing stolen from her, the first prince. After a short time, the protagonist together with the first prince and the head of the knights were at the same table. Then the guy said that everything happened as he thought, and they had their own plan to act in this way. At this point, the protagonist thinks that it seems that he just decided to accept everything said by a superior person, and she, how much does not listen. Not that she understands, but in her irritation rises up. It turns out that when they rescued the first prince, he gave her a little briefing. He told the protagonist that just in case he put a double safety device, something like a watching mercenary or alarm clock that will ring at a set time. Of course, hearing this, the girl did not calm down and asked, what role does it have, because she does not know any such devices. Then the action shifts to the present, and Eleanor asks the guy what their next plan is. Then the first prince says they need to wait for the main culprit. Suddenly they heard a voice ask what happened in the courtyard, at which time the head of the knights turns around and says that it is only worth mentioning the devil, and he will immediately appear, at which time the first prince himself says that he hears a lot of voices. It turns out that these voices were heard from the Viscount's daughter and wife. Then the girl asked her mother why all the mercenaries are lying without feelings, and also asked if her father knows about it. Following her daughter, her mother says that she also does not understand anything, because the Viscount did not say a word about where and what he is doing now. Right after this conversation, the girls look at the fact that at the table in their house is the first principal along with Elena, which they're, of course, a little surprised. Right after that, the girl's mother asked who these people are. And then the first prince took the floor and introduced himself. Naturally, the Viscount's daughter was a little surprised at this and asked, what business is His Highness, the Prince of the Net House? While her more penetrating mother, looking at the first prince, wondered why he had blood on his head. But Elena does not give the woman to think long over the situation, and informs that in the imperial palace there was an unprecedented case of theft, and she together with His Highness the Prince are investigating. While hearing the name of the girl, the daughter of the Viscount wondered if it is true the villain whose name is Elena. While Eleanor herself says that after a long tracking, they arrived at the residence. Then, smiling sweetly, she asked the women if they knew what she was talking about. Then the women compared all the facts about the incident of theft and the blood on the prince's head and began to wonder, did the father do it too? At which time the pleased prince himself says that if the girls have ever seen the thing in question, that let them not testify. He said in such a case, he would absolve them of any responsibility in the matter. The women who had naturally seen the thing before were very much frightened. At the same time, the Viscount himself arrived at the house and called his employer, the Marquis of Tennessee, a scoundrel. It turns out that the man was dissatisfied with the fact that he had carried out his orders, and he treated him impolitely. He was embarrassed that Marquis didn't even praise him for his work, but nevertheless he was still pleased to see Marquis fall for his deception. After a short time, the Vicomte walks through the door of his house and decides that the Marquis can enjoy himself as long as he likes, for he will soon wipe the smile off his face. Then the Viscount climbs the stairs to the second floor of his residence without even noticing that there are guests in his drawing room. He says that if he can only convince the first prince of his plan, everything will be fine. While climbing the stairs, the Marquis thinks that the maid must have cleaned the place where the prince will live. But suddenly he turns towards his guests, because it seemed to him that there were people in the living room. Then he saw in front of him Eleanor and the first prince, which naturally very much frightened the Viscount. He is trying to understand why these two are together in his residence, while he realizes that he knows absolutely nothing. But he decides to first push this woman aside and somehow to make the first prince feel better about himself. Suddenly, a man comes down the stairs and immediately falls to his knees in front of the first prince and pretends to be worried about his health, asking if he's awake. Naturally, this reaction a little surprised the first prince, but the man did not stop and called the fact that the guy woke up great happiness and also asked if he remembered anything. According to the Viscount, he was very happy to meet the prince in the alley, but suddenly appeared robber and attacked him. But at the same time, Viscount asks the first prince not to worry, because he, according to his words, defeated the villain and took care of the first princes. At this time, the main character who watches Viscount considers him a slippery bastard, because she understands that here, trying to turn the situation in his favour. The protagonist realises that in fact, the Viscount was pushed by a superior person and that he was going to kill Lloyd. But most likely, after seeing Lloyd unconscious, he awoke other feelings. The protagonist realises that he wanted to use this situation to his advantage and gain even more power by having a puppet who was supposed to be a Lloyd. At this point, the guy asks the Viscount if it was really like that, to which he gets an affirmative answer, while the still disgruntled protagonist asks you how much he mocked the last Lloyd that he came up with such a thing. In this case, the protagonist was not going to tolerate the lies of the eyelid, and said that his words are fundamentally different from what she heard. Of course, it is incredibly surprised the Viscount, and he asked what the girl means. Then she immediately ordered Diol to bring the man they had, whereupon, after a short time, the knight brought and kneeled some young lad. So yes, the girl with a smile on her face asks the Viscount if the man she caught is really lying, saying completely different things. Immediately afterwards, she says that this young fellow said that the Viscount had arranged to kidnap the first prince. Naturally, this did not please the Viscount, who asked what she was telling him, and also inquired why he should kidnap the first prince. According to him, his loyalty to His Highness has been misconstrued, and she must immediately cease this nonsense. Then the girl looked at the lad who was brought by her knight, and told him that as he himself could see, the Viscount was saying different things. And she also asks the lad what he thinks of it, whereupon he said he would show her something. It turns out the guy decided to ask the girl to look in his pocket on his chest, because according to him there is a man who Comte gave him after he hired. According to the guy, it could be evidence of a crime. Hearing this, the girl immediately ordered her knight to find the check and give it to the prince. At this moment, the main Elena realises that Lloyd is a real trickster who is well prepared, because she could not think that he uses a hired double spy in such a way. Immediately afterwards, the knight took out some letter from his inner pocket and handed it to the first prince, who began to smile. According to him, the cheque which he holds in his hand has the Viscount's signature, which proves his guilt, while naturally, The Viscount himself denies it. Then the first prince got up from his seat and said that it hurt his heart, because in the eyes of the Viscount he probably lacks a lot of things, while the Viscount himself is trying to get out of it and says that it's a misunderstanding and he will try to explain everything. But the protagonist interrupts their dialogue and asks the Viscount if the thing she holds in her hands is the same misunderstanding. Seeing this pot, the Viscount was incredibly surprised and asked where this thing from Elena, because he definitely and her turned in. But suddenly he realized that he had said too much information and immediately covered his mouth with his palms. Then he continued to look at the first prince, waiting for his further actions. Then the not-so-happy guy says that he asked my lady to find the rat that had gotten into his palace and was stealing things, and that's how he got her on this path, after she caught the thief by the tail. At that moment, Bacon tried to say something else, but the first prince was surprised that this rat was also going to kill him by kidnapping him, while his blue eyes seemed to be spewing sparks. Then a very frightened Viscount, looking at the first prince, said that he could explain everything, and he should let him do it, while he wondered whether Lloyd had always had such blue and threatening eyes. Then the Lloyd said that he did not need explanations because his wife and daughter so told him the whole truth, and all the words of the Viscount will no longer have any meaning. At this point, the Viscount bowed before the first prince and realized that everything is over because his family threw him and his to death to survive themselves. He realized that his death is close. One well said that he was thinking of giving his loyal and long-time subject one last chance. Naturally, hearing this, the Viscount was very much surprised and asked if the fellow was serious about it, while not forgetting to thank him. But the Lloyd simply ordered the Viscount to speak. Naturally, at first Bacon did not understand anything, but he asked who was pulling the strings and controlling him to commit such a crime. At this point, the Viscount himself tries to pretend that nothing of the sort has happened, but wonders how much the first prince knows about it. Seeing that the Viscount does not want to split, the first prince decided to press, and asked if it means that the Viscount committed his kidnapping of his own free will. Naturally realizing that for this he faces imminent death, the Viscount immediately said that it was not so, and he only acted as he was ordered. According to him, the kidnapping and the attempt on the life of the first is all the evil deed of the Marquis of Tennessee. It turns out that the Viscount did it so that if he died, he took the Marquis with him. He then told the first prince that he had told him everything and asked if he would spare him, to which the first prince said that of course he would spare the Viscount if he provided evidence that the Marquis had encouraged him to do so. According to the first prince, he not only guarantees the safety of the Viscount, but also gives him this ring, which is very expensive. Seeing this precious stone, Viscount realizes that he will get to start a new life in another country, and realizing this, he says that he will provide the first prince with documents confirming their relationship with the Marquis. After a short time, the Viscount did present the documents to the first principal, who after looking at them said that this would be enough, and so he would give the stone to the man, who in turn thanked him for it. A girl enters and declares that she is from the trading company, Beatrice. Looking at the Viscount, she tells him that she has come here for a debt. Naturally, the man is very much surprised and does not understand what kind of debt we are talking about. But the girl immediately snatches the gem from his hand, leaving the man with his mouth open. Then she looks at the gem and says that it is a magnificent gemstone. However, it will only cover about 1/4 of the amount that Viscount borrowed. At the same time, Viscount opposes this and says that he never borrowed money from Beatrice's trading company. That is why the girl must give him the gem. But 2 guards immediately grab the man's hands, which frightens him even more. He asks what they are doing and asks to let him go now, because he will report them as fraudsters. Then the girl says that Viscount already owed a large amount of money to other trading companies, and they bought these bonds. Suddenly she pulls out the documents that are proof of this, and says that the amount of money there is quite large. Looking at these documents, the Viscount is surprised and says that this is simply impossible. While the girl arrives and says that she asks him to pay his debt diligently in the future, Eleanor looks happy and thinks that time must have been tight. But this girl has exceeded all her expectations. It turns out that it was she who persuaded the girl to buy the bonds with the debt in the Winter, but she was not sure about it at all, and said that of course they can buy all the bonds of the Winter right now at a low price. However, there is a high risk that the return of the borrowed funds will not be possible. Then Elena persuaded her that they will definitely be able to return all the money, and assuring the girl was able to persuade her to buy all the bonds. Then, having heard Eleanor's arguments, she said that she would trust her and prepare the scene, and she should just give the date and time when they should break in. Transferring to the present time, we can notice how Eleanor, together with the first principal, already leave the mansion of the Viscount, who is on his knees thinking about the fact that if this continues, he will not be able to escape and will die at the hands of the Marquis. He does not understand why everything turned against him, because he was sure that everything goes as usual. But for some reason, suddenly everything changed. He's trying to figure out, since when the situation got out of control, and watching Eleanor leaving with Lloyd, he hears them talking about how Eleanor asked the guy to show some respect to his partner. He realized that it was the girl's fault that his plan went awry. Suddenly the Viscount grabbed his sword, and thinking that it was the girl's fault, he started screaming for her to die, because according to him she is the villain. While the protagonist turned around to see what the noise is making, the Viscount was already heading straight for her with a sword in his hands to commit murder. Naturally, the protagonist was very much frightened by the fact that the Viscount's sword was hanging over her head. But suddenly, the first Prince Dostavlia knife, which she handed him, and was able to block the blow to the Viscount, with a dexterous movement of the guy made the sword to jump out of the hands of the Viscount. Naturally, because of this, the Viscount immediately fell to his knees and reached for his sword, saying that he couldn't end up like this. But at this time, Diol had already presented his sword to the Viscount's throat. Then the knight asked how he could dare to do such a thing, while Bacon only asked if he would put away his sword, for he did not understand how a knight could dare to raise his blade against a nobleman. Then the girl said that the Viscount is right, and he is an aristocrat, and from this may be a problem. Of course the knight tried to oppose this, but in the end gave in and decided to put his sword away, while the protagonist asked the Viscount not to worry, because it does not mean that she will be lenient to him at all. According to Eleanor, he will leave the room and they will start new negotiations. These words shocked the Viscount. Then the action shifts to the day of the plenary session, where the aristocrats enter the room, and one asks the other if he has arrived. Then we learn that the questioner is the Earl of Wotton, who is a supporter of the Crown Prince. Then the Earl of Harris, who is also a supporter of the Crown Prince, says that the atmosphere in the room is a bit tense. In response, he hears only that today is the first day that the first principal is present at the plenary session, so it's only natural. And yet the man emphasizes that the aristocrats of the faction of the first prince is too fussy. At this time they are talking among themselves then, that today no one has seen His Highness. And also they are not quite clear why Viscount Zephyr has not yet come. You, at the same time, video all this picture. His interlocutor says that all this time the first prince showed only his pathetic side. So of course they are all concerned. Then the Marquis intervenes in the conversation of the counts and asks them not to worry, because according to him the meeting will be held as usual. Of course the count does not quite understand what he is talking about and asks the Marquis what it means. Suddenly all those gathered notice that someone seems to have arrived, and then it turns out that that person is the Duke of Rosary who enters the hall. It turned out that Duke Rick Rosaria is the head of the Emperor's faction that adheres to neutrality. Seeing him, all those present stood up, and the Marquis of Tennessee said that he had heard that Hertz Rosaria had recently appointed a daughter as his successor, but he was in no hurry to congratulate him. Hearing the congratulations, the Duke himself thanked the Marquis for this, and specified that they had not seen each other for a long time, so it was even more pleasant for him to receive congratulations from him. Marquis smirks and says that he is also happy about the great news, but he thinks that this bastard will soon pay for everything, and he will make her bite her elbows. Hon imagines how much the protagonist will be furious if the Crown Prince's bride will be his daughter, also wondering whether she can, even in such a situation, and save her noble manners. At the same time, the Marquis also pays attention. Why is not seen? He thinks that he hid with his tail between his legs. Suddenly, one of the guards tells everyone to stand up, because His Majesty's and the Emperor and His Highness the Crown Prince enters the room. Bring them all. The people stood up and greeted them with their heads down. Then the emperor, along with his son, sat down at the table, while everyone else chatted amongst themselves. The supporters of the first prince were a bit worried and surprised that he didn't come, while his opponents thought it wasn't surprising, because they thought it would happen like this. The Marquis himself sat with a smirk, because he was sure that the first prince was dead. Seeing that everyone was whispering amongst themselves, the emperor ordered everyone to be quiet, for the crown prince would begin the opening of the meeting. He thought about the fact that his eldest son was gone, and he wondered if the opportunities he had shown him had ended there. At this time, the crown prince stood up to obey the emperor's order and start opening the meeting. The guy started saying that he was declaring the plenary session open. While one of the guards informed the other that His Highness the First Prince had appeared, naturally the second guard was a bit surprised at this. The crown prince noticed the noise going on around him and asked what was going on. Then the guard replied that he was informed that someone had arrived. Hearing this, the crown prince asked who it was. And then the guard said that His Highness the First Prince had arrived. Hearing this news, the crown prince was very much surprised, as well as the Marquis of Tennessee himself, who thought he had eliminated his rival. At that time, Lloyd, who had entered the room, apologized for his tardiness and justified himself by saying that it was the first time he had been here. Then the emperor told his son that there was nothing wrong with it, but told him to sit down as soon as possible. Naturally, see the first prince. The crown prince is very angry, for the Viscount told him that he had dealt with Lloyd, at which time Samuloid looks at his brother and smiles at him. These actions further begin to irritate the crown prince, who does not understand how such a vile worm as his brother dares to look at him and smile. At that moment, the crown prince ordered everyone to shut up, for he would start again. And just as he began to announce that the plenary session of the Kartika Empire was now open, his older brother interrupted him. Oi asked everyone to wait a bit because he would like to discuss an important issue before the meeting starts. This irritates his younger brother even more, who is surprised that Louis is now interrupting him. So he tried to say that he can speak after the participants have expressed their opinions. But the emperor immediately allowed his son to speak, for which he thanked him. Immediately after that, the guy begins to tell that the essence of his news is that some time ago he survived an assassination attempt and reprisal from an aristocrat who stole things belonging to the imperial family. Hearing this, Marquis very much agitated. Unlike the emperor, who was incredibly furious and asked who dared to make an assassination attempt on members of the imperial family, then Lloyd ordered the guards to open the door. And after they did it, all incredibly surprised because they saw a completely unexpected figure there. It turns out that behind the door was Eleanor, who immediately greeted the great emperor. Take her away, all present began to communicate among themselves. They thought that if the Lady of the Rosary, together with the first prince, it is already crossing all boundaries. At this time, even the Duke of the Rosary was very surprised. Seeing his daughter the Duke was very angry and asked if it was she who made an attempt on the first prince, as the girl interrupted her father and said that she understood what they all probably thought, but it was not her who did it. Immediately after these words, she turned to the guards and ordered them to bring the man who was guilty. And after the guards carried out her orders, the Marquis became even more agitated, wondering why the hell this girl was able to capture the Viscount who was brought into the courtroom. The guards immediately put the Viscount on his knees, and then the girl said that right now in front of them was a man who had made an attempt on the life of His Highness the First Prince. Naturally, the people who were there were very much surprised by this, and immediately asked the Viscount how he felt, while noting that it was simply unthinkable. Then Lloyd took the floor and said that before proceeding to the meeting, he wished to notify the Emperor of an urgent matter, for in addition to punishing the Viscount for attempting to kill a member of the imperial family and stealing imperial property, there was a man behind him. It turns out that during their last meeting, the protagonist was delayed and said that it seems to her that they need to renegotiate with the Viscount. Then he asked what he should do, and the girl said that they will bring him to the plenary session, which will be held in a few days. She asks that he then and reveal the identity of the man behind him, for it is after that she will at least keep him alive. At this time, at the plenary session, all the people are incredibly agitated, while the girl realizes that slowly approaches the moment of interrogation of the Viscount. Suddenly, Marquis asked everyone to calm down and said that he does not understand anything, while he is trying to look calm, which he does quite well. Hearing his words, the first prince immediately asked what the Marquis meant, and then he heard that the first prince was almost killed in a kidnapping. But the imperial family knew nothing unless the guy did not deliberately hide this fact. Then the same Marquis asks if it lends itself to common sense. Naturally, his words stirred everyone up and made them think. They began to be inclined to believe the Marquis. The Wind Knights of the imperial family could not be unaware of what was happening. According to all present, it is really unthinkable. These actions have very much angered Eleanor, who thinks that the man is a snake because he has changed the general atmosphere with a few phrases. Then the Lloyd asks Marquis what he's trying to say, and Marquis says that he suddenly thought it was all a play. Then the Lady of the Rosary intervenes in their conversation and asks the Marquis if he really claims that the first prince is lying. Then he once again twists and says that he just doubts the truth of what is happening, but the girl immediately asks why His Highness is the first prince. The Marquis then states the reason he is thinking about and asks if the first prince is trying to expand his influence by making a strong impression on the First Assembly, or if, in his opinion, maybe the first prince wanted to use his closest supporters to create a non-existent puppeteer and get rid of the foreign power that is bothering him. These words, a little angry Viscount who realised that the Marquis saves himself in parallel, Eleanor realises that no matter how weak the first prince was, no one dares to say such a thing to him, and then she says that all the words of the Marquis are baseless assumptions. But Marquis still continues to bend his line and says that in his opinion the desire of two people who are not used to doing government work is ahead of their capabilities. He says that maybe they should just consider this situation as a small incident and pretend that nothing happened. According to him, he is ready to forget this mishap, as well as the Brand will ask others if they can follow his example. All this is watching, and the Emperor himself, who wonders what his son will do now. Then the Lloyd says that he has listened carefully to the Marquis, and of course in his opinion the latter is entitled to such an opinion, but he is not lying either. According to him, it would be nice to put this doubtful question on the ballot. Naturally, these words shook the Marquis a little, for he does not understand what this sudden stratagem was on the part of the first prince. Then he says that such a thing is not solved by such methods. Then their conversation is again interrupted by the Lady of the Rosary, who asks them if she may speak, whereupon she informs them that there is a law which states that if a question arises on which the opinions of the Lord are divided, a vote may be taken. Realizing that the situation is not tilted towards the Marquis, he asks Elena to calm her insistence, but the girl does not give up and says that if he does not believe it, then let them call a judge and see for themselves, because she does not care. And she also said that she said this only after a few days ago visited the library of the Imperial Palace and looked at books on imperial law. According to her, in Article 687, paragraph 39 of the legislation of the Empire, is written that if the opinion for some reason divided, because of doubts about the reliability of the subpoena or other nuances of the vote, can be held with the permission of the imperial family. Then, after these words, the first principal pokes the Marquis and says that apparently even those who are used to public affairs do not know the law well. Then the Marquis gives up and says that they have the right to vote on the law, but he thinks that it is still impossible, that there will be many in favour. Hearing these words, Lloyd says that in that case they will start voting and this topic will be put on the agenda of the meeting, if more than 1/3 of the members of the meeting agree to it. Immediately after that, he asks those who agree to raise their hands. Suddenly the first of those who raised his hand was the Duke of Rosaria, who thus gave his consent. Then seeing this, the girl mentally thanked him and decided that she will still repay him for this act, while she realizes that she will repay her mother, of course. Unexpectedly, after such an influential man raised his hand, the others also decided to express their opinion and began to agree. But the Marquis looked at them and thought about the fact that everything was happening as expected, and the first prince was still short of men. But unexpectedly, Russell gave his consent and said that after listening to His Highness, he thought and came to the conclusion that it seems that he had witnessed what had happened then. He said that that day he was going to the library to prepare for the meeting of the noble stag, but in one of the alleys he saw the Viscount getting into a carriage supporting the first prince. According to Russell, since the Vicomte is a close supporter of the first prince, he didn't pay much attention to it at the time. But now he realized that it was a kidnapping. Hearing these words, Eleanor was very happy, because she realized that only she and the Lloyd held the same position. But the witness and the testimony of a third party will give credibility to their claims. Immediately after that, it was announced that this was the end of the voting and the topic of today's meeting, and the first principal asked to consider the Marquis's objection as loyalty for what he thought about the authority of the imperial family. Of course, the Marquis himself was not very happy that the vote ended not in his favour. At the same time, the Emperor himself confirmed that the Marquis's opinion on the agenda had been cancelled, so the Lloyd could proceed. Immediately afterward, the first prince stated that he was giving the two circuits a chance to reveal the identity of the man behind him, at which point the Viscount remembered how he had been ordered to reveal the identity of that man at the plenary session, for if he did not testify, his family would be exterminated. Seeing that the Viscount was silent, Lloyd said that Boycong had revealed the man's identity to everyone, while the Viscount himself remembered that if he answered the question, his life would be spared. It was after these thoughts that he decided to reveal the man's name to everyone. And when the Viscount was already calling the name of the man who ordered him to kill a member of the imperial family, one of the guards cut off his head. Seeing how the Viscount's head literally fell from his shoulders all in the hall, were very surprised and asked what it was. But suddenly, the Crown Prince intervened and ordered silence. He said that no matter what, this man had tried to kill a member of the imperial family, and in his opinion, there was no need to let him live. And because of this, the meeting could not continue and was adjourned. Immediately afterwards, the Crown Prince left the meeting room in a hurry, and while the protagonist thought that the murder of the only witness would have solved the situation, but these actions were enough to sow suspicion in the hearts of all present, in her opinion, because the name of the Marquis was clearly heard, and the Crown Prince silencing the Viscount only made things worse. At this time, people really started to talk about it. They didn't understand why the Crown Prince did it, but they clearly heard the name of the Marquis. Then a theory appeared in their heads that maybe the Crown Prince was involved in the assassination attempt on the first prince. At this time, the girl stood with a smile and thought that for the moment she was satisfied with this, while the Emperor was diligently looking directly at the protagonist, which of course made her a little confused, because she did not understand why he was watching her. A short time later, the Marquise talks to the Crown Prince behind closed doors. The Crown Prince reminds him that the latter said he would help him, even if he disobeyed His Majesty's orders, while he reminds the Marquise that the beautiful girl of marriageable age and the worthless Lyle mocked him. At this time, the Marquis could not answer him anything, but the boy came closer to him and asked him if he was right, to which he heard the answer that the Marquis was very ashamed. But the Crown Prince does not give up so easily and orders the Marquis to investigate who is a member of the faction, as well as to find out information about Elena Rosaria. Also, the Crown Prince emphasizes that he must find out what kind of relationship she has with his older brother. Then after the plenary session, 2 days passed. The protagonist was in her office and read some documents. It turned out that in connection with the incident at the meeting, Lloyd was busy receiving calls from numerous aristocrats. She met her friend who said that the Viscount had so many debts that even if they took the mansion under their control, it would only cover a minimal amount. But everything worked out according to the best possible scenario. Hearing this, the girl asked what happened, and then her friend said that he had managed to save a lot of things without paying off debts, and everything happened just as Eleanor had said, and the budget of their trading company increased significantly. And her friend also said that she had something useful for her. Of course, it surprised Eleanor a little. But then her friend said that she discovered a contract between the Marquis of Tennessee and the Viscount. Reading this contract, the protagonist realized that it describes everything in even more detail than in their evidence. At this point, she realizes that the Viscount acted behind their backs. Then the protagonist praised her friend Lady Rendor for such valuable documents. Then the protagonist did not realize what must have been after the conclusion of the meeting. The Marquis rushed to the Vicomte estate to cover the traces of his connection with him. But what if it was to be expected that he could not find anything? And now she believes that his only 3 words when he saw it. It turns out that at that moment, everything was happening just like that, and Marquis was very much surprised that someone came and took the contract first. Then she gets really excited and realizes that they left some message that they know a lot more than he thinks, and they have evidence of the crime. So she thinks they are close to success. At that moment, the protagonist could not even guess that a storm would soon break out. While in his office, Eleanor's father was looking thoughtfully out the window. Then he remembered what his daughter had said at the meeting, and wondered why Elena had done it for the first prince. The father tries to convince himself that it's not what he thinks, and his daughter did it because the first prince was in danger, while he realizes that his daughter's character has definitely changed a lot lately. Suddenly, in the room to the Duke comes the head of the knights, which is a little surprised him. Then he immediately asked the Duke on what business he came at such a late hour, to which the guy said that he had something to tell the Duke about Elena. Then the information that told the knight is definitely very much surprised the Duke. The next day, the protagonist said hello to her parents. They did it in return. Immediately after that, sitting down at the table, the protagonist smilingly said that it was the middle of summer and it was getting a little hot. At that moment, her father seemed to be thinking about something. Immediately afterwards, the man told his daughter that he wanted to ask her something. Naturally, the girl was a little surprised at first, but immediately asked what her father wanted to ask. Then the Duke asked his daughter if she really wanted to break off her engagement to the heir to the throne and get engaged to the first prince again. Naturally, such information surprised the girl very much, because of which she could not even finish her glass, and choked in the process. Seeing this, her mother got excited and asked the girl if she was all right, but heard something affirmative response. Immediately after that, through a cough, the girl asked her father why he said that. She thought that it was absurd, and she had been in a good mood up to that moment. Then the Duke said that he thought that her actions during the last days were suspicious and strange, as well as what had happened during the plenary session. He said that while he was thinking about everything yesterday, Dial came to him and told him something. Then the girl's mother intervened in their conversation and asked what the knight had told him. Then the Duke said that his daughter had given her dagger to the first prince, and during the kidnapping incident the relationship between them seemed unusual. Then the girl was a little indignant and said that what her father had heard was a misunderstanding, while she once again thought about the fact that she had asked the knight not to tell anyone about it. At this point, she realizes that this is what it means that the boy is her father's vassal, while she decides that she will get to him a little later. And now the priority is to resolve this issue with the Duke. Then the mother once again intervenes in their conversation, and notes that there was even a case when His Highness personally came to meet their daughter. This news even more surprised the father, who asked the girl if it is true, when she thought only that her mother is only adding fuel to the fire, but she is well aware that if we'll categorically deny their relationship, it will look even stranger, and first of all, I need to calm down, then gathering her thoughts. She says that she knows that her father is worried about her recent actions, and she said that she has no idea what to do. However, according to the girl, now she is a different person, and will no longer disappoint the two of them, looking at her parents. She asks that they believe her, and the girl's words do make a big impression on them, because of which they look at the girl with doting eyes. After these words, the mother of the girl says that of course they together with her father will be on her side, because she has really changed. Then the protagonist thanked them for their trust, and decided that one difficult stage is past, while she accuses the past owner of the body that because of her karma with her day after day, should happen to her similar things. Immediately afterwards, the girl's mother asks her if she would like to go somewhere with her after lunch. But the protagonist says that she can't do it because she already has an appointment. Hearing this, the girl's mother asked who she had agreed to meet, and without hesitation, Lena said that she should meet the first prince, and she notes that they were originally supposed to meet the day before yesterday, but it did not work out, and immediately after these words, she realizes that she said a stupid thing. At the same time, her mother asks if it is really about His Highness the First Prince, while her father just observes their conversation. Then the protagonist starts to explain everything to her parents and says that they may misunderstand her words, but she emphasizes that it is honestly not what they might think, and they decided to hold a meeting related to the incident that occurred during the plenary session. While seeing that her parents do not respond, she tries to influence them somehow. Immediately after that, the story moves to the imperial palace. There, the protagonist is heading to the first prince's rest, thinking that the whole situation is a bit annoying, and the misunderstanding has not been resolved, and because she came here, she's 100 times more restless in her soul. Suddenly, the protagonist is distracted by the picturesque view that surrounds her, and realizes that this garden is very beautiful. In her opinion, the only advantage of this place is that it is very beautiful, according to her. She looks at it. She feels as if all the irritation disappears. Suddenly, a man calls out to her, and then the protagonists do not realize that this man is the crown prince, which is very disrespectful. Then they ask the girl what she's doing here. Then she turns around and thinks about the guy could not just ignore her and pass by. But of course she does not say it, and greets His Highness the Crown Prince as it is supposed to do. At this point, the guy doesn't answer anything, and just keeps looking at the girl. Then she turns away, telling him that she has an urgent matter to attend to. So she asks him to let her leave. Then the Crown Prince doesn't let her do it, and grabbing her arm orders her to stop. Then he asks the girl if she shouldn't stop doing it, because according to him, even indulgence has limits. But the protagonist pretends she doesn't understand, and tells the guy, while she asks you, what is this idiot talking about? According to him, her methods are terribly childish and trivial. The guy says that he realizes that the reason lies in her love for him. However, according to him, there is a limit to everything, and therefore the girl should stop doing it. At the same time, he also says that he hopes that she will not provoke him anymore, and show herself in front of him with that vile man, which is his brother. At this moment, the protagonist is silent, which the guy asks her about. At this moment, it is as if she is transported into the world of her thoughts and tries to understand what this idiot hopes for. Then she decided to ask some question to the Crown Prince just in case, and asked him if he really read that she is hitting on the first prince. To get his attention, hearing this question, the guy asks if it is not true. She doesn't realize that if it's not a provocation, then why is she running around with this shallow fool? At which point the girl pushes his hand away and angrily asks the Crown Prince not to be mistaken because according to her, the first prince is much better than he is. Naturally, these words made the Crown Prince very angry, and with anger in his eyes, he asked the girl to say it again. Then looking straight at him, she wondered if he really thought she couldn't do it, and decided to tell him. She said that His Highness Lord was much better than the Crown Prince, and if he asked in what way, she would tell him that he was better in everything, including character and talents as well as looks. Unexpectedly, the first prince came to them at that moment and said that the appointed time of the meeting with Eleanor had passed, but she had not come yet, and therefore he thought that something had happened to her. Seeing the picture of the girl communicating with his brother, he asked what was going on here. Then she thought that the first prince is a trickster who chose the best time to appear, and who is the perfect person to hurt the Crown Prince. At this point, the girl realizes that she had to be patient. But of course the problem is that all the way from home, she listened to the bullshit and was out of anger. Then hugging the first prince by the hand, she turned to the Crown Prince and said that since he asked her why she was dating him, let him know that it is because they love each other. Naturally, hearing this, the first prince was very surprised. But suddenly, the first prince comes closer to them and tells Elena that the appointed time has passed, but she still hasn't come. So he thought that something might have happened, and he immediately asked what was going on here. At the same time, the protagonist saw the first prince and thought that he was a real trickster, because he chose the best time to appear, because he was the perfect person to hurt this Crown Prince. She realizes that maybe in that moment, she should have been patient. But of course the problem is that all the way from home, she listened to the bullshit and was out of her mind with anger. Right after these thoughts, she hugged the first prince by the hand. Despite the Crown Prince reminded him that he asked why she was dating his brother, and decided to answer him by saying that she and Lloydham love each other. Hearing this answer, Crown Prince was very surprised, which naturally pleased the protagonist, because she realized that he probably blows the roof from anger. Then the Crown Prince came to his senses and asked the girl how dare she spin a relationship with another. If she has a fiancé? Then already Elena was in bewilderment. As a result, she's very angry because she thinks the Crown Prince is saying whatever is on his tongue, and she tells him that he shouldn't talk about it, especially considering what he did before. At that moment, she remembers what she saw when she was first here, namely the Crown Prince frolicking with two girls. Then it made the Crown Prince even more angry, who said that men and women are different, and he doesn't understand how she can only look at them from one angle. Then the protagonist immediately asked, "What is the difference that the guy is talking about?" According to her, they have the same head, torso, arms and legs, 2 of each, and the internal organs are also the same, according to her. But suddenly she says that of course they're different in some ways, and asks the guy if it's true. It's all about genitals because they have something that she doesn't have. Then, when the Crown Prince heard about it, he was very embarrassed and asked Elena to stop this conversation, because she has no shame or conscience. Seeing a pissed-off Kaizen, the first prince started to laugh a little, which once again surprised, and at the same time pissed off the Crown Prince. The Crown Prince then tried to grab the protagonist by the arm while telling his brother that this was not a conversation for his ears, so he should leave. But Lloyd defended Elena and said that he refused to leave, while asking his brother not to touch his beloved when he wanted to. Hearing the words that Helena was the lover of the first prince, the Crown Prince looked at his brother again and ordered him to leave. But then the Lloyd hugs Elena and says he's going to show his brother who's going to get away, at which point Elena tries to figure out what the first prince is doing and why he's hugging her. But suddenly her thoughts are interrupted by Lloyd, who dares to kiss Elena on the forehead, making her face a little red. Immediately after this action, Lloyd looked at his brother and asked him if he now understood who should leave this place. Naturally, the Crown Prince was very indignant at what he saw and turned around and said that they would soon see how long Lloyd would do what he wanted. Naturally, this sounded like some kind of threat to his older brother. After that, the Crown Prince left Elena alone with Lloyd and decided to leave them after all. Right after the Crown Prince leaves, Lloyd tells Elena to bother explaining to him what's going on here. But Elena can't say anything because of the embarrassment she's just experienced, and puts her head down and takes some time to realise what's going on and what she's just done. The girl realises that she has grown her own grave with the statements she said to the hereditary principal. After this action is transferred to the next day in Elena's office, where the protagonist writes something and thinks about everything that is happening. Suddenly, she hits her head and the book she is writing, and thinks that her soul has entered this body, and she is very interested to know if it is possible to activate regression in any way. It turns out that day, she ended up running away, leaving Floyd demanding the truth about what happened. She knows it would have been nice to end it all there. But because of what happened at the Imperial Palace, the rumours spread so fast that they reached her parents' ears as well. With her head still resting on the book, Eleanor realises that this is definitely not something to avoid, and she needs to fix it soon. Then she decides that first of all, she should meet Lloyd and explain to him the situation that has happened. Suddenly at that moment, someone starts knocking on her door, and the girl allows that person to enter. The knocker turned out to be her maid, who came to tell her that a guest had come to Eleanor. Of course, at first the girl was surprised by this, and immediately told the maid that she was not ready to meet someone, so she asked the maid on the right children of this guest. But the maid refused to do it and said that it was a very important guest. But Eleanor still couldn't understand who it was about. Suddenly, the first principal bursts into the room, asking if the girl wants to send her back, and informing her that he's sorry about it. Then he also adds that he missed his beloved possessing a fatal charm, and so he couldn't wait, and came to see her in person. Seeing Lloyd was, after all, she realises that of course she wanted to meet and talk, but certainly not right now. Also suddenly, the maid slams the door loudly and says that in that case she wishes the two of them a good time together. After being left alone, Elena asks the first prince if he would like to sit down first, and after they both sat down at the table, Lloyd asked the girl if she was ready to explain everything to him now. Then, once again a little blushing, Elena asked, "Is there any inconvenience in what was, after all, she did so out of necessity?" Yes, and besides, it is written in their contractual clauses. According to her, she is not obliged to tell about all her plans to him. She also turns the tables and says that on top of everything else, Lloyd himself also acted without telling her his plans, so he can consider them even. Then Lloyd smiled and said that the girl was of course right, and they could forget this moment. Then asks if she wants to talk to him about pressing matters. It turned out that since the plenary session, many aristocrats had contacted the first prince. Of course the girl realised that among them there were empty-headed, but also to make it look as if the Lloyd had grown powerful. It was quite good. After all, from now on they must constantly confront the crown prince who is against them. At the same time, immediately after these thoughts, the girl immediately asked if the emperor has not presented to the first prince of employees. Then the guy said that it is possible so, but the emperor was pleased with what happened at the meeting, on that suddenly gave him the award. Of course, Eleanor does not share the joy of Lloyd, and asked him if it seems to him that this is a great result. She also decided to ask, what is the name of the count who helped them in the vote? At this point, we learn that Eleanor only knows the names and titles of the aristocrats, but not their faces. No, and he does tell her who the guy was. According to him, it's the same Russell Cedric he told us about last time. According to the first prince, is a man who is the embodiment of talent and ability that he himself chose. Eleanor is happy about this news because she realizes that it seems that he liked him, and the guy has extraordinary skills. Then after these thoughts, she said that this is a great relief for her, and also asked if the guy is not finished. But then Lloyd said that the most important thing is left, and says that the emperor is interested in their relationship. Hearing this, Elena immediately changes in the face, because she expected it, but also feared most of all. The girl thought that most likely this is the end for her, because with his character, he will never leave her alone, because she twists two of his sons. At this point, Lloyd notices the wrinkled face of the girl and tells her that, and do not be so wrinkled. You see, the reaction of the emperor was not bad. Then the protagonist asked how it went, and the Luida decided to tell her everything. It turns out then, he and his younger brother were summoned to the emperor, and the emperor told them that he had heard that today was hectic. Then the younger of the brothers said that it was not something the emperor should worry about. While the Lloyd remained silent, the younger of the brothers looked angrily at the older one, and said that it was a common occurrence. Then the emperor, after listening to his youngest son, asked Lloyd what he thought about the situation. But Lloyd, instead of answering the question, asked the emperor if he could ask him for something. After the emperor gave his consent to this, Lloyd said that he would very much like the emperor to break his younger brother's engagement to Lady Rosaria. Naturally, hearing about it, the emperor was incredibly surprised, and as if even rejoiced, unlike his younger son, who was in complete shock. But suddenly the emperor laughed out loud, and told Lloyd that he was really acting beyond his imagination, and the emperor thought that since Lloyd had decided to ask him to break off the engagement, he had finally decided to take important steps. In addition, the emperor noticed that Lloyd called Kaizen younger brother instead of crown prince, thus breaking the succession structures. Noticing this, the emperor decided to rekindle this flame that was smouldering between the guys, and said that, unfortunately, he could not fulfill this request because everything related to marriage is regulated by state law. Immediately after these words, the younger brother began to squirm and asked Lloyd if he had heard what his father had just said. At the same time, he said that if the Lloyd does not know the laws, then let him sit and keep quiet. But the unexpected emperor interrupted his son and said that in any case, it is impossible to foresee the future, so anything is possible. He said that since ancient times, whoever could get the beautiful maiden was the best of heroes. Naturally, these words affected the brothers in different ways, and looking directly at them, the emperor wished that they would continue to fight, just as they are now, and trample each other. He wants one of them to climb to the top, to take possession of everything. Immediately after these thoughts, he told his sons that the night is late, so on this they can go. But the younger brother refuses to go and says he has something to say. Naturally, the emperor asks what he wants to talk to him about, at which point the Kaizen informs him that he will be holding a hunting festival. It turned out that the hunting festival was an event that the imperial family held once a year, and its purpose had always been to reduce the number of wild animals attacking private homes in winter and to provide food supplies. However, since the focus is on strengthening ties between the aristocrats, they hunt, it will definitely be a good chance to strengthen their position. While looking at his son, the emperor thinks about not acting like a crown prince, and also gives permission at the request of his son. Then Lloyd tells Eleanor that despite his refusal to break off the engagement, the emperor was not in a bad mood, and he thinks it's worth noting that a hunting festival is planned in the near future. Hearing about the festival, the main character immediately changed her face. She couldn't believe it. Seeing that the girl is concerned, Lloyd tried to ask her what's wrong, but the protagonist held her head in thought that the hunting festival is the event at which the protagonist will first appear. It's as if she can see a picture of the original book in front of her, in which the main character is walking in the mountains. But suddenly someone's arrow hits her in the shoulder. Then immediately the girl fell to the ground from a sharp sense of pain, and to her began to approach the same man who shot her. It turns out that he was a Kaizen who was incredibly surprised that he hit a man. He immediately asked the girl if she was okay, and also said that he mistook her for a mountain beast. At this moment, the protagonist clung to the Kaizen's chest while having tears in her eyes. It turns out that then the protagonist ran through the dense forest and quickly reached the place where she heard the screams, and at the moment when she saw the scene unfolding before her eyes, Kaizen froze, even forgetting to breathe, while the protagonist asks herself why this is happening now. After all, according to her information, the protagonist should appear after the hunting festival, which will be held in winter. According to her opinion, if Rosetta appears after this sudden celebration, then she will die, I think about it. The protagonist loudly asked why everything happens like this, and getting closer to the guy, she asked him why the hunting festival would be held now, and not in winter, because according to her it wasn't like that in the original novel, and the festival was in winter. According to her it was held in winter. Then the protagonist came along, and the Kaizen fell in love with her. Then after all that she was eventually killed. At that time, Loida was already on one knee next to the girl supporting her. Eleanor notes that she still couldn't break the engagement, and here the main heroine appeared. But the first prince interrupts the girl and says that she should be more impartial, of course, at first. Or she didn't understand what he was talking about. But she still said it's a lot easier for him to talk about it than for her, because it's not about her life. Then the guy asked the girl to think in more detail about this situation, because the protagonist appeared at the festival, which was held exactly in winter. At that moment the girl, as if it had hit the mind, and she thought that the prince was right, because the protagonist met the Kaizen at the winter hunting festival, which means that unless this condition is met, she will not show up. Then Loit tells her that even if the protagonist shows up, the reason why the crown prince had to kill her is because of her abuse of the protagonist. Then the prince asks if she will behave like that in the present, and Elena says that it won't happen. After hearing her answer, the first prince said that in this case the hereditary prince has no reason for hatred and its elimination. After Elena heard these words, she finally rejoiced and said that the prince is right. And at the same time she thought about the fact that if you think about it in detail, the plot of the original novel is already changing, because even if everything goes wrong, her actions on the way to the goal will not change, and she is happy about the fact that now she is together with Lod. Then, the guy interrupts her thinking and holding her hand asks her not to rush and not to worry, because besides, she has him as her partner, and if something happens they can discuss it and think about it together. After hearing another word of encouragement, the girl thanked the guy for helping her to come to her senses. Immediately afterward, the first prince adds that now the most important thing is to get the emperor's attention, for they need to better demonstrate their relationship to him, according to him. That's when the girl can also begin her goal number 1. Naturally, Elena agrees with these words and asks if it's enough to show everyone that they are closer than they are now. So she even notes that she will visit his palace once a week and asks the guy what he thinks about it. But suddenly, Lloyd was against it, for in his opinion, visiting the palace once a week was too infrequent, and she would need to do it even more frequently. After a short time to show everyone their relationship, the main character began to visit Floyd's palace much more often, and that the funniest Lloyd's piece became more comfortable for her than her own chambers. At that moment, looking at Lloyd, she thought that for this reason, she slowly began to be more interested in this man. And immediately after these thoughts, the girl asked Lloyd if she could ask him about something. Of course, Lloyd did not refuse and said that of course she could do it. After that, the protagonist immediately asked what the guy was doing in his past life. Of course, Loya was a little surprised by this question and asked if she is really interested in it only now. But the protagonist said that she just woke up curiosity right now, and she thinks that if she had asked before, he probably would not have answered. And she decided to do it now, simply because recently the atmosphere between them has softened up. Then the guy started to humour me and said that it wasn't hard for him to tell it, but it wasn't tactful to ask such questions. Then the girl said that he was acting like a sly fox again. But she immediately said that she would be the first to start with her generosity. Then the girl began to tell that her life was nothing special, and she was born in an ordinary family, but still there was something that made her different from others. According to her, she was also a smart and smart girl, and that's why everybody liked her. When she was little, she solved the math exam in high school, advanced course. At that time, her parents praised her very much, saying that the girl was a genius. At that point in time, she thought everything would be smooth sailing in her life, but due to her father's overexpansion of his business, their home was destroyed. At that time, she thought that even though she was still a child, she would still be protected. But her parents couldn't even do that. Then left completely alone, she held on with all her might, saying she would never break, and in the end, the girl almost achieved her desired future. But there was that fatal incident that ended her life, namely the accident. Concluding her story, the girl says that then she opened her eyes and turned out to be the daughter of the Duke. According to her, she used to try very hard to go higher, but considering that in this world she is at the top, the girl thinks that her death was not that unfortunate. After a little thinking about her words, the guy said that the girl really has a very ordinary death. Then Eleanor was surprised by it, because she certainly did not expect him to say any warm words of support, but she could not expect such a cold answer. She could not expect it. She was pleased by this fact, because in her opinion, it was much better than awkward consolation. Then she agreed with the guy's words, and said that that was the end of her story, and now it was his turn. Was his. Finally, the guy told her one word, hearing which the protagonist realized that she had heard it somewhere before. Suddenly, she remembered that Asung was the leading company of South Korea. Then after she guessed, the guy said that it is really true, and he is the heir of this company, whose name is Lee So-jun. Hearing this at first, she couldn't believe it. But turning on her head, she realized that if she thought about it in detail, among the names of the candidates to succeed, Asung Group was his name. Then she wondered, is this young man really the same Lee So-jun? Then she immediately told the guy that such information would make him crazy, because he was an even more outstanding prick than she would have thought. Then the guy thanked the girl for the compliment. At that moment, looking directly at the first prince, she thought about the fact that of course she had assumed before that he was just reborn in the body of a prince. But it turned out that Lloyd was originally a big shot. Then the girl decided to ask why such an important person like him suddenly died, because she thought that the heir to such an important company is accompanied by a guard. According to her, such a person will not die from an accident like her, because even the food is thoroughly tested. It is because of this she wondered how the guy could die. She even suggests that it could happen because of a chronic disease. Hearing her assumption, Lloyd was silent and as if thinking about something. But the protagonist did not want to wait, and immediately asked why he is silent. After all, she asked him a specific question. The girl presses the fact that she even told him first her story, but he just sits and listens to her. Then the first prince still told her that the culprit of his death was his younger brother. Of course, the protagonist was very surprised by this, but then the guy added that the younger brother poisoned him. At first, the protagonist could not even believe it, but after realizing that the guy is telling the truth, she realized that it is their really very unusual deaths. After a while, the action moves to the beginning of the hunting festival. It turns out, while the girl was waiting for him to start, something happened. It turns out that the protagonist met with her friend Lady Chadagi and was surprised to ask her if she was still working. Then her friend was very happy that the protagonist came and asked her to listen to her. Then she apologized for not being able to keep her promise, but because of that, she was able to save His Highness Lloyd. But she says she thinks it will be hard for her to keep her promise in the future for some reason. One such reason is that her family found out that she was running an information spruce, and at home she had more knights assigned to her, as well as her father and brothers decided to come and get her every day. Immediately after that, the girl asked if it would be less dangerous. At this point, the protagonist, despite her, realized that she had prepared so well because she was afraid of being scolded by her, while Eleanor said that there was nothing wrong with it. And yet in the future, she asks her friend to warn her in advance. Otherwise, she will definitely get angry next time. Of course, her friend agreed with this and asked Elena not to worry about it in the future. One day, Elena's other friend, Lady Rendor, visited her early in the morning. Of course, the protagonist was surprised and asked why she came so early. But when she came closer to her friend, she was very surprised and asked what was happening to her face. Then her friend apologized to her that she had come to her early in the morning, but justified herself by the fact that she was doing an urgent thing. And so it happened. It turns out that she came to report that she received a contract to trade tomatoes. Then the action is transferred to some time ago, while her father in his office very much swearing and asking who the hell is behind the trading company Beatrice and stealing his contracts. At that point in time, the girl decided to say that it was her. Naturally, her father was very much surprised by this turn of events, but the girl said with even more confidence that she is the owner of this company. Suddenly, her father got very angry and swung his hand and hit his daughter in the face, asking her what she was talking about. Then the girl's mother stopped him. Upon hearing this story, the main character hugged her friend and told her that she had done her job well, while the satisfied girl whispered in Lenny's ear that the tomatoes were now theirs. At that, Eleanor worried at her friend and asked what would happen if the Count gets so angry that he throws her out of the house. Then Lady Randor asked the girl not to worry about it, because her father is very sensitive to the opinion of others. So it definitely does not happen. Then the actions of the story move back to real time. At this point in the tent, the main character enters the maid and says that everything is ready and asks if the girl will go out. But that naturally gets a positive answer. Going outside, the protagonist was very surprised and realized that the words of the girl really turned out to be true. Suddenly she saw in front of her friends, who said that they were waiting for Elena, and also thanks to the fact that Lady Rendor told the truth, Anna safely took part in the hunting festival. Immediately after that, all the girls sat down at the same table, which was noticed by people from outside. Then the girl and the guy who saw it began to talk to each other, because they were wondering what happened that they gathered together as a foursome. Then the guy answers her that he had heard that Lady Elena had changed, but it was really an unexpected union in his opinion. At the same time, one of the girls who was at the other table noticed that from the other side, these girls perfectly match. Of course, her companion did not understand what she was talking about. But then the girl asked just to look at them. She emphasized that Eleanor is the heiress to the most powerful family since the imperial family, while her friend Lady Randor, who runs the Beatrice Trading Company, has her own abilities and excellent financial resources. And even Lady Ain and the Cheddargis, who are all praised for being smart according to that girl, all these girls are like one unified force between them. But suddenly during their conversation, the first prince comes to the girls. Naturally, it surprises them, but at the same time, watching the first prince holding Elena's hand, the girl says that in fact it is likely that all these connections have a single purpose. Hi there. One of the girls seems to turn to Elena and ask her should they see this as an increase in influence for the sake of His Highness the First Prince. It turns out that the girls used to think that the scandal involving the young mistress and the first prince was a show designed to provoke the crown prince. But contrary to the aristocrats' assumptions that it would soon be over, it seems as if these two are truly in love with each other. It also turns out that since ancient times, it has been said that the mouth of the rosary only obeys the orders of the emperor, which ultimately means that the heir who is supported by the Duke of the Rosary will definitely become the emperor. And in this case, since they can see that in this case the man chosen by the heiress of the Rosary family, Helena, is the first prince, they assume that he is likely to become the next emperor. In her opinion, now is not the time to sit idle. Then the girl tries to leave and says that she needs to come to her senses, because someone's husband asked her to take care of one thing, which she completely forgot about. Then immediately all the girls also began to leave under various pretexts, which were obviously made up. As they set off all in different directions, Eleanor, along with her friends and the prince, was still at the table. At this point she talks to the prince about the fact that it seems to them that everyone's attention is focused on them. Naturally, the prince agrees with this, and then the girl suggests that in this case to add more oil to the fire. Apparently everything was their pre-planned plan. Then the protagonist pretends that this conversation did not happen and says that the prince must have been very busy with preparations, but at the same time she asked what business he came here for. Then the guy said that no matter how busy he was, nothing is more important than meeting her. Of course, this was all done so that other people would hear and once again make sure that they love each other. And we find out that this was actually planned in advance. Then the action is moved back to 2 weeks ago. Then the protagonist emotionally says that the festival is not a bad idea after all, and they can take full advantage of this chance. Of course, then Lloyd didn't quite understand what she was talking about. But the girl said that an unreal number of people were going to be there, and so they had to show their ardour by any means necessary. Hearing these words, the first prince agreed with the girl and suggested that she start by practicing. Then Eleanor was a little surprised, but the prince rose from his seat and told her that they should try to look at each other as lovers. Naturally, then she agreed with him. Then, seeing the girl's look, the guy was not quite satisfied. He asked her if she really looked at her favourite person like that. The girl immediately asked the guy if there was no passion in her look, at which point the guy grabbed a mirror and explained to her that passion is passion, and she had the look on her face of a Bhutana about to kill someone, seeing herself as a girl and not badly frightened. After that, the girl asked if it was really that scary, and she finally realizes that one close look is not enough. In her opinion, the thing is that she has never had a relationship because she was busy earning a living. Then, looking at herself in more detail, she immediately says that she seems to understand what to do, and suddenly pointing to her eyes, asked the guy if her eyes now resembled those of her lover. At this point, Lloyd got a little embarrassed and kind of laughed, but he asked the girl to try to soften her gaze a little, and after she did, he said that now she needed to work on her mouth a little. This is how after such training they attract attention to themselves, so that others can see them as passionate lovers. Then the action moves back, and the girl says that it is a handkerchief that she made praying for the prince's health. She starts to ask him to accept it. Of course, the Lloyd thanks the girl for this and says that it is an honour to receive the handkerchief from her. Immediately afterward, she said that her soul is at peace. If the guy is not happy, at the same time she thinks of everything going great, and now she has to try to say it with even more exaggeration. Right after that, the guy says that if she's calm, he'll be calm. At this time, the others are still watching them. The girls who were watching them are surprised that Lady Eleanor has such a side to her. The other is asking if they have always had such a great relationship with the prince. At this point, Elena herself notices that they are talking to each other and realizes that they were able to get a great reaction from everyone else, while she wonders to herself, should she start the cherry on the cake? Then she says that she has heard that the hunting festival is not very dangerous, but she hopes that Lloyd will be careful and emphasizes that he should not forget that she will always be waiting for him here, at which point the girl gently touches his face, which surprises Lloyd, because everything was not according to plan. At the same time, Smiling Girl asks the guy if they have agreed, but his reaction does not suit her completely, and she tries to understand why he is quiet. In her opinion, it is necessary to act as they practiced, because of the fact that the guy is silent, there was an awkward situation. But suddenly the guy interrupts her thoughts. They grab the girl by the waist. At this point she was a little surprised and asked what is doing here. Then he said that they have to do this to show everyone their relationship, and asked the girl if it will not accelerate the breakup of the engagement. After a short time, the action moves to the younger prince, who is informed that Elena was hugged by his older brother. When he questioned his butler about it, he once again emphasized that it was Helena and His Highness the First Prince. Immediately afterward, the infuriated Crown Prince asks the Tennessee Marquis if everything is ready for their plan to be activated, at which point the Marquis says it is, and he bowed and said that everything goes according to the will of the younger prince. Then the guy was happy about it and thought that finally everything is going fine. Now he wants Elena and his brother to try to do as they please, and he will look at them at the end of the festival, and they will definitely not be able to continue this circus anymore. After a short time, the king announces the opening of the hunting festival. Immediately after that, Lloyd tells Elena that in this case they move out. At this time, next to him is John Yohard, who is the newly appointed escort knight of Prince Lloyd. Hearing that the first prince and his knight are about to move out, the protagonist wishes they were careful, at which point they are watched by the crown prince, who is not very happy with what he sees. He is very angry that Eleanor communicates with his brother. At this point it was noticed by Lady Randor, who asked her friend to look back. Of course Eleanor did not understand at first, but when she turned around, she saw the crown prince and realized that it looked like he had been drilling them with his gaze recently. She doesn't care too much about that, because her task is over, so she tells her friend that they have to go back, and now she just has to wait and spend time here at the social party. Suddenly, after some time, the knights bring some people on a stretcher. They ask everyone to get out of their way. Of course, the main character noticed the noise that arose out of the blue. Then her friends also noticed it, and Lady Randor noticed that something happened. Then Eleanor immediately said that she would find out what happened, and immediately returned to the girls. She then goes into the tent where the men were taken, while a knight asks when the healer will come, while another, who is also very frightened, says that first they should be given first aid. The protagonist notices that all the barracks are hastily erected, and also the knights are looking for healers, she wonders. Did the incident result in casualties? And then she sees the very guy who got hurt. It seems to her that this is not an ordinary incident, because usually at the festival does not happen anything like this. But looking more closely at the knight, she notices that it is the same knight practitioner who followed Lloyd. Then the protagonist wonders if all the victims here are his people. Realizing that the situation could turn out very badly for everyone, the girl wonders what happened to Lloyd himself. Then she approaches one of the knights and asks him what happened, but he says that he was in a hurry and therefore is not aware of what is happening. According to him, he himself cannot fully understand what is happening. Hearing these words, the protagonist changed her face, for she was very frightened, at which time another knight came up to her and said that he would tell her everything. According to him, it happened just after they went deep into the woods and discovered the game. At that point in time, some of the knights noticed the sound, and after they took a closer look at their surroundings, they noticed that some good game had appeared. Then, according to them, this game would attract a lot of attention, and so they should catch it. After these words, the first prince draws his sword and tells everyone to be ready to hunt, when he suddenly sees something very strange. It turned out that at that moment on their game jumped out a huge wolf, which ate the deer, of course. Seeing this, all the knights were in complete shock because they could not have expected this. The airplane was also very surprised because such a large wolf is not usually found in hunting grounds. Suddenly, Lloyd, along with the knight who was to accompany him, heard some noise and shouting people. Naturally, the first principal immediately asked what this noise, as it suddenly turned out that one of them knights was attacked by a wolf. At this time, the other knights immediately drew their swords to defend themselves against this unexpected attack. At this time, the first prince is surprised that in addition to everything else, the individual is not alone. After the first attack, the wolves immediately left, but reappeared, which once again surprised the knights who did not understand what was wrong with them, because these animals are similar to the grey wolves, but they are much larger in comparison with the available data. Then the first principal asked if there were plans to release such beasts at the hunting festival originally. But John said that there were no such plans, and the purpose of the hunting festival was to promote friendship among aristocrats, and the main prey were small animals that were easier to catch. Then the first prince wondered if he had correctly realized that the night was leading to the fact that someone had deliberately released these beasts, with the knight saying that first of all Lloyd should stand back, for he and his knights would oppose the wolves. Well, he said that first they should carry the wounded outside the forest, while he would lure the wolves. Naturally, the knight resisted this, and said that this was not the right thing to do. But Lloyd drew his sword and said that this was an order. Immediately afterward, the first prince started running away to attract the attention of the wolves, while the others tended to the wounded man. After a short time, all 5 were chasing the first prince, while he thought that this was what was going to happen, because it would be even more interesting than originally planned. In his mind, it was strange that Kaizen had held back all today, but now he realized it was all because he had been hiding that number. Then the first prince noticed a large tree trunk and decided to duck so that the wolf would hit his head on the trunk, and then he would finish him off. And initially everything went according to Lloyd's plan. But suddenly he was attacked from the side by a completely different beast, at which time someone shouted at him to dodge. Suddenly it was the very knight to whom he had given the order to leave and who now saved his life. Then the knight asked Lloyd if he thought what would happen if he went alone. But at that time, the surprised catcher noticed that the guy was able to cut such a large wolf in half. Then he guessed that in all likelihood he had chosen a knight to accompany him even better than he had thought possible earlier, at which time the knight had said something to him but had not paid attention to it. Then the guys noticed that the 3 wolves barely body their fellow, which naturally surprised them. At this time the knight notes that wolves are known for their concern for their fellow men, but apparently these wolves were deliberately starved almost to death. Lloyd also agrees with these words and emphasizes that they were prepared just for a meeting with him. Immediately after these words, the guy asks the knight how long it will take to deal with these wolves, to which he gets the answer that according to the night before sunset can be managed with all the individuals. At this point, Lloyd realizes that they have plenty of time, but still says he needs to deal with them as soon as possible, thinking he needs to do it before the fast-acting princess has to rescue the prince again. At this time, the knight tells Elena that they managed to kill one wolf, but the rest chased after His Highness. Naturally, the girl is very frightened that the wolves chased after Lloyd. Immediately after that, the girl asked where the horse was. Of course, the prince did not understand and asked where she was going, but after the girl got on the horse, he immediately asked if she was going to the forest, because it is dangerous there, and the search party will soon go after the prince, and therefore there is no need for her to go on her own. But the main character is still very persistent, and asks the guy to get out of the way. Hearing this, he at first did not really understand what the girl was saying. After a short time, Eleanor was already in the forest, where she stopped the horse because she noticed something. It turned out that she saw the swords with blood that were left here. And then she realized that she seemed to be on the right path. And the girl remembered the words of the knight, that His Highness went into the thickest part of the forest. Immediately afterwards, she dismounted from her horse and tore a piece from her dress, tied their feet to keep the shoes from coming off their feet. Then she said that really no one knows what can happen to a person. It turns out that Dial was preparing the girl for this. That day he said that he would teach her cover techniques and those used by the knights of the escort. Then the protagonist was not particularly pleased and asked the knight if he really thought that the day would come when she would need it. Then the guy answered her that if she continues to date the first prince, he believes that this will happen quite often. Hearing this, the protagonist asked if he really thinks that he will be constantly kidnapped and she will use these skills, to which the guy said that it might really be so. After all, no one knows what will happen tomorrow, already moving to the present. The protagonist thinks that all this is quite strange. After all, she herself notices that she is not herself when it comes to something related to Lloyd and Cason's incitement. And the recent incident with the Viscount also influenced her, because according to their contract, she just has to watch everything from the outside. But she doesn't want to do that because it's unreasonable, especially in anything to do with Lloyd. Immediately after these thoughts, she took one of the swords in her hands, and having shortened her dress to make it comfortable for her to fight, the protagonist went into the thicket of the forest, while thinking about the fact that she becomes an impulsive person. Then, going into the depths with a girl, is surprised that there are visible rays of sun, and coming even closer, she sees a beautiful statue, thanks to which she guesses that it is a temple. She realizes that this temple is similar to the one she saw in the book in a past life, with the girl wondering if this statue was erected to worship this man. But she doesn't understand it, because there is no god or religion in this world, and she doesn't know if she can encounter traces of a god she's never seen before, even in the central district. Suddenly or not, she heard some noise, and she turned around to see one of those big wolves that had been released by Kaizen. She still realizes that the creature is a bit large for a wolf, and she doesn't dislike it personally. But if she doesn't kill it, the first principal will be in danger. Then, seeing that the wolf is ready to attack her, the protagonist decides to end it here and now, and sticks her sword into him, wondering if the wolf wants to eat her all at once, and if he really thinks that everything will go his way, then sticking the sword even deeper into the wolf's mouth. She wishes he would eat the sword instead of her. At the same time, the prince, along with all the knights, were able to deal with the rest of the wolves. Then one of them says that the official name of these animals is the grey ghost wolf, and they mainly live in the northern region and are known for not leaving their territory. At this point, and the knight says that if, to translate his words in other words, someone intentionally released wolves into the hunting grounds, in his opinion, it is really amazing. Lloyd also asks if this surprises the other knights, and when they are silent, he turns to Johard and asks how he thinks there could be any more wolves left, excluding the ones they've massacred. Then the knight said that it was possible because there were many wolves that ran away when they chased them, noting that they tend to bunch up in a pack, so he was sure there must be more of them. Hearing this said, He thought the same thing and wondered if the guys were ready to join this game. Suddenly, the first prince hears some strange sounds and decides to go there with his knights to kill another wolf. But suddenly he ordered all the boys to stop, for he saw something unusual in the distance. Turns out he saw Elena once again kill a wolf by shoving her sword right into its mouth. Naturally, the guy was surprised to see Elena here, and because of that he turned to the girl, who immediately turned to him. Seeing that the first prince is safe and unharmed, the protagonist was very happy about it, but Lloyd immediately yelled at her for being reckless. Of course, at first the protagonist did not understand anything, and wondered why he was acting as if he was really worried about them. At that moment, the other knights look at the prince and Elena in bewilderment, while the girl herself realizes that maybe Lloyd is doing this because they acted like lovers. Then, looking at the prince, she says he shouldn't worry about her because she's not hurt. Then Lloyd notices that the girl is bleeding, but Elena still says she's fine, and all that blood isn't hers, it's wolf blood. When Lloyd heard that the blood belonged to the wolves, he could calm down and said that he was very glad that the girl was not injured. She had decided to borrow a cloak from Lloyd, for her clothes were quite inappropriate and embarrassing, at which point the attendant knight of the first prince asked if it was true that on the way here the girl had dealt with 2 wolves. At the same time she says that it was just like that, and also in addition to those 2, she saw a wolf much larger than usual, but unfortunately missed it. At this point, the knight reflects on the fact that Sir Diol has always been proud that his mistress was a master swordsman, which is to be expected from a man and family of the Rosary, who is renowned for the art of swordsmanship. At this moment, the first prince intervenes in their conversation and asks Elena why she went into the forest and fought with the wolf. Then the main character justified herself by saying that she heard the news about the attack on them, and that's why she decided to come here. But she thinks about it and as if asks if she says everything right, because her partner was in danger and she had to save him. Then, hearing her answer, the guy grinned a little and said that his princess is too reckless. But he immediately decides to catch the wolf that the girl saw and return to the base, while Eleanor is quite annoyed with the way the guy talks to her, because she came to his rescue and he talks to her respectfully. Tone. Then approaching the knight, the Lloyd says that first of all, since the total number of wolves is unknown, they should shoot them as soon as they see them. In response to this, the knight says that he understands everything, and as soon as they see them, they will attract their attention. At this point, Eleanor intervenes in their conversation and tells the guys that she knows the direction in which the wolves have fled, and so she can go ahead, but immediately says that the lady will leave the place. Of course, Elena, who before reaching the guys defeated 2 wolves, is outraged and asks why it has to be the way the Lloyd said, but the guy remarks that it's because the place is quite dangerous. Then, for the girl interceded, an accompanying knight who said that the lady has more outstanding skills than anyone else here, but the lord is still adamant and asks if it is true that since she killed the wolf, now became so necessary to the imperial squad of knights. Realizing the displeasure of the first prince, the knight immediately adjusted his statements and apologizing said that she misspoke. Then Loida turned to the girl and asked if she heard the words of the knight, because according to him, there are enough knights so they can manage without her help. Of course, the girl still wants to go with them, and asks if any 10 minutes sooner, if she joined them, will not end. Then this situation starts to really annoy the first prince, and he says that she really doesn't understand anything. Then grab the girl's hand, he takes her aside, and offers her to talk in private. Then right after they got away from the rest of the group, she immediately yelled at the prince and asked what the problem was. Then the very calm prince asks her why she's trying to go so far. But the protagonists, without sparing a turn, yells to the guy that it's a matter of efficiency, and she doesn't understand why he's so annoyed and obstructing her. Then, after analysing her words too, the first prince said that it was all of course because he was very worried about her, while touching her face at this moment. Then he also asks her if she really doesn't understand the reason for his concern, at which point the main heroine looks at him in surprise and asks what he's talking about. But she begins to remember that moment of communication with the knight on her basis here. It turns out she felt a tremor in his hands when he told her that the girl was reckless, and only now Elena managed to realise that all these emotions on the part of the prince was not a game, but a sincere reaction. Coming out of her memories, she removes the guy's hand from her face and says she doesn't know about his worries, because she doesn't understand them. Immediately afterward, Lloyd tells her he heard her and suggests that instead of arguing, it's best not to move away from him. Already, after a short time, we learn that the last one they captured the wolf leader, and it was a really difficult process. But fortunately, everything ended without casualties, and they managed to defeat them. It turns out that the protagonist thought that this incident would be resolved safely, but she never dreamed what was happening on the other side of the forest. And there already flew the arrow of the Kaizen, who also heard some very unusual sound. And looking closely, the Crown Prince noticed that he saw a person in the distance in front of him, namely a girl with shiny silver-coloured hair. Looking at her in more detail, he saw that his arrow had hit her in the shoulder, making it obvious that this is the main character who was supposed to appear in the winter. And Lena realises that the wheel of fate continues to spin on and on. Immediately afterwards, the action shifts to a few hours later, at which time Eleanor, along with the first prince, have already returned. At that moment, all three of Elena's friends ran up to them and asked her, does she even imagine how they were experiencing them? Then the protagonist was glad to see her friends and asked if they really came out to meet her. At that moment, they did not answer her question and just noticed that the girl was covered in blood. Then Eleanor noticed that it was not her blood, but wolves. Upon hearing this, Lady Chadargi immediately asked if the girl had really killed them all by herself, but Eleanor said she hadn't. During their conversation, the Duke came up to the girl and was glad that she had returned alive and well. After a while, Lady Chadargi was already heading towards Eleanor's tent, going into her tent. The girl immediately asked Eleanor if she had called him, and then Eleanor asked why her father was in front of the second zone. Hearing this question, her friend told her that something had actually happened to Count Sher. Of course, Eleanor was not aware of this, and asked what it was about. But her friend informed her that after she went to find the first prince, the Count said that if something dangerous happened to the first prince too, there would be a shortage of free hands, and so he blocked the way and stubbornly stood his ground. Then Helena's father ordered the Count to stand back, but the Count said that if the entire imperial family's night squad was engaged, there would be no one to rescue His Highness the Crown Prince. But according to Lady Chadaga, the Duke did not care at all about Count Sher's interference, and he said that he would call the personal army of the duchy to help in the territory where the first prince is. At which point the girl admiringly says that the Count at that moment had a very funny expression on his face. Naturally, when Eleanor heard the news, she was surprised that her father had even mobilized a personal army, and asked her friend if he had really decided to support the first prince, but her friend said that it was not for His Highness. According to her, the Duke was overreacting because he was worried about Helena, and according to her, Count Sher was unhappy with the mobilization of his personal army, but the Duke in turn pressured him. So the Duke told the Count that his daughter was there now, and if he ever interfered again, he would not tolerate it. Also, Lady Chadagi remarked that Hertz was very worried about the definition. Hearing these words, the protagonist was incredibly surprised by it. But suddenly their dialogue was interrupted, for again a noise arose, and heard it was Helena asking, what could have happened again? Turns out the service was going on because His Highness the Crown Prince had returned. It turned out that the Crown Prince was not alone, and on his horse with him was the protagonist of this novel, but Eleanor has not yet noticed it. Looking straight towards the Kaizen, she thought that he must have been bitten by wolves. At that, she finally saw that the Crown Prince was not alone. She wondered what it was. After all, it looked like a shiny silver thread, and according to the girl, it could be a fox. But suddenly, during these reflections, someone touches her shoulder, from what Eleanor is very frightened, and turning around, she saw in front of her the first prince, who told her not to look in that direction. She asks Lloyd what happened because he appeared out of the blue, but their conversation is interrupted by Lady Chadagi, who informs that His Highness the Crown Prince has brought a girl. Hearing this, Eleanor was incredibly surprised and finally realised that long curly silver hair and frightened golden-coloured eyes were staring back at her. She realises that this is the girl who will fall in love with anyone who just once looks at her. Then she and the girl looked at each other, and Eleanor realised that this is the main character of the original novel, Rosetta. At that moment, Eleanor realises that the Kaizen has finally met her, the one that will lead her to her doom. The next day, the protagonist woke up and was very scared because she didn't know where she was. At this time, one of the maids I was near turned to the girl and said that she would help with the preparation. Of course, at first, Rosetta did not understand who it was at all. But the maid told the girl to hurry up and get ready, because His Highness the Crown Prince was coming soon. Hearing this, the girl finally remembered that she was in the imperial palace. At this time, the Crown Prince was already heading towards her. The maid, who obviously didn't know this, said that the prince is now eating. But he opens the door to the girl's room at the same moment, which makes her get up from her seat and greet the prince. Then the guy smilingly asked the girl if she was awake, and then the girl immediately rushed to him to hug the prince. But suddenly, while she was running towards him, the girl tripped and fell right into the prince's arms, scaring him in the process. Then the guy said that the girl is quite careless, but looking at him, she just asked for his forgiveness. Then looking at the girl, he asked, "Is she really smiling in such a situation?" But she implied that she was just very happy to see him. At this time, the healer intervenes in their conversation, and apologizing for this, says that first of all he will proceed to treat Miss Rosetta. Then the first fledglings agrees with him, and holding the girl by the shoulders, asks the healer to start it soon. At this point, the girl asks if she can treat the personal maid with her. Naturally, at first the Crown Prince is surprised by this, and asks who she is talking about. And then the protagonist points to the girl who helped her from the morning. According to her, when she woke up, the girl was helping her, and she noticed a wound on her hand. Then the protagonist asked the maid what happened, but the maid said that she just broke a glass while cleaning and she's fine. And Rosa notes that if she cut herself while working, it means she really had a hard time. So she begs the prince to allow the maid to heal her with her. Then the prince smiled and said that the girl really has a good heart. The healer also agreed with the words of the Crown Prince and said that this girl is indeed with a very kind heart, which is rare. At this point, the protagonist asks whether this characteristic deserves attention. But the Crown Prince says that there is nothing in this world to ignore. Then the healer agrees with him. But the girl tells the prince that there is one thing that always deserves attention, and that is her. Immediately after that, the action moves to the first prince's rest. There he communicates with Elena, and the girl asks him if he heard that the protagonist in one moment charmed everyone, while she is a little offended because she tried so hard to raise the reputation of the guy. But Lloyd says it's okay, because it was within the realm of the expected. Then Elena says he's right, and it's impossible for her future actions to follow the plot of the original novel. Then Lloyd says that it's true, and if she just doesn't torture Rosetta, it won't do anything to incur the Crown Prince's wrath. According to the girl, it is in this case that she will not die, and deep down she hopes that these two will meet, and her and Kaizen's engagement will break up. Immediately after these words, the protagonist brings a cup of tea to her mouth, and I can smell her favourite shallot tea. Then she recalls that Lloyd had definitely said that he didn't like sweet teas, and that this tea didn't suit his tastes, while she recalls how during one of their meetings the guy described the tea as tasting like herbal Korean medicine. Remembering this, Elena wonders what is going on with the prince, and also wonders if he did it out of respect for her. While seeing his face, she realizes that he apparently does not want to drink it, because he even wrinkled his face. Then she says that the tea is especially delicious today, and also informs him that she will stay away for a while. But in doing so, Lloyd will be even busier, all because she just has enough to keep her life, and his goal is not a life, but an entire country. Naturally, the first prince agrees with her words and says he needs to work even harder. Well then, the girl asks that he still does not let his guard down, because the events began to unfold according to the original novel. After all, according to the story, the Crown Prince has turned into a perfect protagonist, unlike what he was until now, and all of this according to Elena because of the appearance of the main heroine. In doing so, she reflects on the fact that when the Crown Prince knelt down and began to seek Rosetta's love, all the readers were delighted. But her thoughts are interrupted by Lloyd, who asks if the girl thinks that then she will also change her view of him. From this question, naturally, Eleanor is very surprised, and then, seeing her surprised face, he reworded his question and asked if the girl thought she would develop a sympathy for Kaizen.